What?
Praise the Lord, beloved of the Most High God, in the mighty name of King Jesus. Before we get started this evening, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you and give you my apologies as to the lateness of us getting started this evening. It is totally all Matthias's fault. No, I'm just playing. It's all my fault. Okay. I'm new to all of this, brand new. And there was a learning curve for me, quite frankly. So my apologies. We got a couple of things mixed up, got it straightened out. Hopefully everyone who is interested in watching this will come back and check it out at a later time. But I'm sharpening my teeth on this, guys. So thank you so much for your patience. I do value your time, and I am very sorry about the delay this evening. But tonight, joining me, we have Brother Matthias in the production room handling our very important business. Brother Matthias, if you'd like to say hello to everybody. Did he disappear?
If I can find the mouse. Hey, how's it going?
I'm not sure. Am I
everybody?
I don't think I'm here.
Okay. And then also my guest this evening. I hear you just fine, Sister Angel.
But do you hear me?
So,
Okay.
yeah, we hear you.
Okay.
I hear you just fine.
All right.
I have Sister Angel. Sister Angel, do you use your last name in your broadcast and everything?
Yes, Martin. Yes.
Okay, Angel Martin with me this evening, and we're going to be discussing HIV does not equal AIDS. In case you guys didn't understand the graphic, there is a line through that equal sign there. It's not saying it is equaling AIDS. It's saying it does not equal AIDS. And we're going to talk about the reasons why we believe that to be the case and show you some information that for you to consider for yourselves to make your own decision. And I don't know if those of you remember the hype about HIV AIDS years ago and the absolute mind-boggling hysteria that was created behind the HIV AIDS information and the way it was presented to the public and how people were literally terrified and petrified and afraid. I remember, and I'll never forget it. It even makes me tremble when I think about it because I remember how many people were affected by this so dramatically and in some cases detrimentally. And we're going to be talking about that this evening. In addition, we may touch on how this plays into the coronavirus, if at all, and some other issues this evening with regard to former so-called outbreaks that have occurred in the past and how that affected the public and what became of it. We're going to try to keep this to about an hour and a half because we're already late getting started. So without any further ado, Sister Angel, if you would do me a favor in our chat this evening, and thank you everyone who has joined us again, and tell us about yourself and what your channel is about.
All right, guys. Well, it's Angel. I'm sure you guys are familiar with me. I started a YouTube channel, that I actually posted videos to, really within like the last, half of this year. And I don't have a computer, so we don't have internet out here in the country. So I do everything on my phone. So I have to just kind of record audio on Spreaker and upload short things, or else it takes all day. But yeah, I just talk about different things I feel the Spirit leads me to discuss, especially when it comes to deceptions that I'm noticing going on in like the YouTube community, because I have come to really see the what I call like the truth or industrial complex. For the most part now, I see a great deal of YouTube, especially truther channels, as the mainstream media. So I see that is the main or primary propaganda outlet that they use to play with us. I don't think most of what they show in the mainstream media anymore is supposed to be believed by the public. I think they know it's like a reverse psychology thing. So I do like to spend a lot of time pointing that out. And then absolutely the most important truth of all is the gospel. And I like to try to draw people in with other subjects and then include in my video at some point, an explanation of what the true gospel is, because I'll find a lot of people, they think that we're on the same page. And then when I mention eternal security, it's, it all goes out the window. So I like to try to put that in as many videos as I can, even, if the subject matter is not relevant. But in terms of this discussion, I did post a couple videos about my experiences and my thoughts on the issue that we're going to be elaborating on tonight. So, and everybody can hear me, right? Because I can't find the call. I don't see where I'm in the call. It says I'm in a call, but I can't find it. So.
Okay, let's give a shout out to the chat. Can everyone hear Sister Angel okay out there? Because we're kind of in a fishbowl here. We're not sure what you guys can hear and what you can't hear. Can everyone hear us okay?
Yeah, normally I can see everybody's icons, and it'll be like I can see the call and mute, but I can't even get to
okay
on my phone.
Everyone says they can hear us just fine, and
great.
So you're good. Sister Angel, did you complete your thoughts on that? You're okay?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. There's not a whole lot to say about that.
Okay, all right. I wanted to ask you, now this is fascinating to me because this is not a lightweight subject. I mean, it's not like saying you wanted to go study how to make ice cream. What got you interested in virology? How did you come to study it?
Well, I was always obsessed with horror movies as a child, and I mean really obsessed with horror movies. And the only thing I could ever really think of that I wanted to do growing up was something to do with monsters. And initially it was like special effects makeup. First marine biology because of Jaws, and then just special effects makeup when I was self-aware enough to know it was really just monsters I was interested in. But then I realized that was a very hard profession to actually be successful in. So it became a hobby. And I was always very interested in biology and the sciences. So when I realized that my mom, when I found out about my mother, that my mother had tested HIV positive when I was 3 and that nobody had ever told me, that was part of it that factored into my interest in viruses. And then also I got a little crush on the Ebola virus in high school. And when I would get interested in something, I would get obsessive, like really obsessive on everything about it. And as long as I was interested in something, it wasn't hard for me to understand the information. So because I was interested in like the HIV virus and the Ebola virus, it was not at all difficult for me to absorb information about, how retroviruses function, things like reverse transcriptase. And I found a whole lot of really interesting stuff, while studying, microbiology in general. A lot of stuff that I think might now be absolute BS, but it was fascinating at the time. It was very intriguing. It wasn't dry subject matter. But I ended up, I went to college, and I was only like pre-med, right? I switched majors eventually before I actually got into too much of a specialty, course load. But, I took microbiology, and it's a while before you actually get up to like the virology of when you're, going to college to become a virologist. You have to do all the other stuff first. And I just didn't have the attention span for so much of the doldrums, especially because I was kind of heartbroken because I found this subject matter so fascinating, and I wanted to talk about it and like talk with the professors and the other students. And so many of the people I was in classes with were actually like, they were like nursing students, because it was all like the basic stuff, and there was, just a whole lot of people that were not passionate about the subject that I was passionate about, just medicine in general, because they were really going there for pragmatic purposes. It's like a formulaic way to be a successful person is to go with something to do with medicine. A lot of them were going to just kind of get, lower level jobs, but they weren't particularly passionate about medicine. But neither were my professors. So when I would get really excited and want to discuss something like, one time I found out supposedly that our one of our cell organs, they're called, I can't even think of the name right now, mitochondria, though. Our mitochondria supposedly, now it's all obviously BS now that I don't believe in evolution, but supposedly it got there in our cells when one of our ancestral eukaryotic cells, that's like the cells that we and animals are made up of, engulfed a prokaryotic cell and formed some sort of symbiotic relationship, which really, it made no sense then. It makes no sense now because it would have just been digested. It really, but they said it evolved, they evolved together that way. And so these were like little things I just kind of overlooked along the way to kind of buy into everything I was being taught. Little questions I had that I just assumed somebody else had the answer to. But before Google was really like popular, at least I hadn't really become a search engine whiz by this time. You just kind of you had to assume that somebody had the answer, but it would be really hard for you to find that, you know, the answer to your particular question without going through hundreds of books or you know, just getting some like great expert who can answer any of your questions about microbiology. So, but yes, I did eventually switch to become a forensic psychologist, which I got my bachelor's in that eventually. I went to school for like 9 years. Because of so much just unnecessary switching or changing my mind or procrastinating and stuff. But I did not actually graduate with any degree in microbiology or virology. But it was something that I studied passionately as a pre-med student, and enough to when the time came, realize how much BS the you know, especially the HIV theory was founded upon, because I myself had questions that did not have answers at the time, you know, but back even when I believed wholeheartedly in all of this stuff, I had questions that things didn't make sense. But I think just my you know, cursory education in this stuff just gave me just enough of a leg up to where I really confidently grasped, you know, the argument against HIV causing AIDS, because I don't assume that maybe there's just some expert explanation that I don't understand. It's all pretty basic, and I realize now that most doctors don't understand this stuff. They don't, and they never were interested in the first place. So when you go to medical school, you do not have time to synthesize independent thought or think critically. You might have time sometime later once you graduate and become a doctor and work off all that debt. But at the time that you're in there, you are just a machine. The only ones who make it are the ones who can memorize and regurgitate an inhuman amount of information reliably every time. And they don't have time for independent thought. They really don't. I don't see how it would be possible. So that was another reason why I dropped out. It was just, that wasn't how I'm wired. I wasn't wired to do that, but you really do. You really have to memorize and regurgitate. You'll know, because you have to know every facet of every bone. I mean, it's just crazy the stuff you have to know. So yeah, that was, you know, my foray into it, which was brief.
Well, in remembering back about the HIV/AIDS, whether or not it equaled AIDS crisis when it was introduced to the public, there was so much confusion. There were so many things people didn't know. There were things that were being said. Some people were coming out and saying things emphatically. Others were saying, well, we're not sure. So the public didn't know what to believe. I remember they didn't know whether or not to believe it was highly communicable and contagious, or whether or not eventually what they arrived at where it could only be transmitted through blood-to-blood contact and or some like type open wound situation with blood that was infected being introduced to the wound kind of thing. Or some people even considered, they were so scared that they thought even any information they received from the government was a conspiracy and cover up. So even when they showed so-called evidence that it couldn't be introduced to the populace through casual contact, there were people who still believed that the government was lying to cover up the fact that it was actually highly communicable. Do you remember that?
Well, so I was born in '86, and we were like, so, you know, my memories really began around the early '90s, and I do remember getting all of this, you know, kind of programming, the HIV AIDS programming, and it was a very like quickly evolving storyline that, you know, originally it was a death sentence, and then it became kind of like a gray area as to whether it's a death sentence, and now it's like off in La La Land. Like apparently I don't know, people are all over the place with it, where where they're trying to decriminalize intentionally spreading it to people, or and I'm assuming now that it's not widely regarded, at least by everyone, as a death sentence, although it really should be, because the medications are a death sentence. But I'm not, the mythology evolves constantly around this stuff. This disease. Now, I remember the AIDS quilt because it came. I'm from Key West, Florida, which is like San Francisco, but like miniature San Francisco in terms of the whole gay scene. And we had the AIDS quilt and lots. AIDS was like a big thing in Key West. We had some of the best like public funding for people with AIDS or HIV. They local. We get they got like lots of money every month to get their medications and groceries and pay their bills and stuff. A lot of people would move there for that purpose. So yeah, it was a big part of our community. And, I had no reason to question it. I did not find out about my mother until I was 12, but she in 1993 tested positive for HIV. And that's a long story. But like I said, I had no idea until I was 12. And by the time if I had found out when I was, but when she tested positive, so it was like in 1992 or 93, I would have absolutely lost my mind, because back then it was absolutely a death sentence. But by the time I was 12, it was just very confusing. It was very confusing as to what that meant. And I was confused about why she had, remarried. Why didn't they have it? Did they have it? I was angry with her because I thought, did they know? Did she not tell my stepdads? Because I had two by then. But, later I found out that they did know, that she wasn't just like not telling them. But I didn't talk to her about it directly until I was 22, because she didn't bring it up with me. It was, I don't know, I just felt like she didn't want me to know. So I didn't want her to know I knew. It was all of that made everything a whole lot more difficult to get through, because I couldn't talk to her about it. And, but yeah, it was that's the kind of thing, like it was so confusing because the story kept changing. You just didn't know where to stand with it, and the prognosis especially. And even I think even the transmission, I'm pretty sure that they didn't stabilize like how you caught it until I don't know, probably around like the late 90s. I know that they went with finally the sexually transmitted disease and mucous membranes. But the thing is I know by the time I was 22, it was widely believed, and it's true, that you have to sleep with an infected person unprotected 900 times to catch it once on average. That was so that makes it an incredibly non-infectious pathogen, right? So
right. Well, you have a really good theory, as Ben was pointing out here in the chat, on HIV AIDS and why it was introduced. Can you touch on that again?
Well, I think that there's a surface level to it, then there's like a whole lot. It's like an onion, right? So I think on the surface, one of the easiest things to convince people of is money. It was, it's very profitable for those involved. And the thing is that the people that you would rely upon to verify whether or not the hypothesis of this virus causing this disease is true, they're also the same people that have the most most to gain financially and professionally from that being the cause of AIDS, because there would be virologists, but specifically people that are experts in retroviruses, and which is the HIV virus is a retrovirus. And if their little retroviruses end up, having something, having to do with this new phenomenon, AIDS, absolutely, they're going to get tons of grants, and they're never going to be out of work. And all they have to do is try to connect their work somehow with AIDS research. And, there's so much funding that goes into that, so many grants available. So, on the one level, that's part of it. But then, there's a really interesting social narrative that developed around HIV AIDS with the beginnings of the LGBT, really as the LGBT, rights, equality movement as we know it today, because we had people in mainly gay men in San Francisco angrily demanding the government do something about this disease they were all getting, and it was mainly isolated to their community in San Francisco. It wasn't just gay guys everywhere, and they were angrily demanding the government do something, as if, and claiming that the reason that nobody cared, there was no funding, going to study this, disease, was because they were gay and nobody liked gay people, right? So that was what it did was it made homosexuals. It really began the narrative of the homosexual being the victim, the put upon victim who you needed to sympathize with, because now they're dying. And it just so happened that they were the first people to be affected by this virus. The virus could get anybody, right? And it had nothing to do with anything they were doing. It had nothing to do with their lifestyle choices. It wasn't their fault. It was very important to frame things in that light, to where it was just dumb, like bad luck, really, that the patient zero was a gay flight attendant, supposedly, right? So it had nothing to do with any kind of repercussions for stupid decisions, even though this particular community of people that were being affected first, it wasn't just homosexuality. It was drug use, and it was like a party scene, and there were behaviors that were very specific to that community, particularly like the use of poppers, amyl nitrate, which is what actually causes Kaposi sarcoma, which had been long established in medical literature, but not a lot of people knew about it because it was a pretty obscure drug that had fallen out of use for any legitimate medical purpose. But they started using it as a party drug, in San Francisco, and at large quantities, very regularly. So I do think that they used, they saw the potential for this to really cast homosexuals, especially homosexual men, who are like the least sympathetic, I think, to a lot of people that were not positive towards when you use the word gay as a pejorative. This was an opportunity to make you feel real bad for them, especially with the AIDS quilt and everything. And I really do think that had a huge impact, because before that, there was just something that they chose to do, and a lifestyle they chose to live. And you could feel however way you wanted about it, but you had no real reason to feel sympathy for them. But now the idea that they were dying of this virus, specifically because bigotry had prevented them getting the proper research, devoted to figuring out the cure and all that was real powerful, and it worked really well.
Well, if I could interject something here, since you mentioned the word bigotry, I want to backpedal a little bit, because I realized, based on your age and when this stuff came about for you, and again, my condolences that your mother suffered because of this, and what happened to your mom. I know this has to be coming from a place of pain for you to even, on some level, talk about this, and I understand that, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences with us. But I also remember that when this first started, it wasn't homosexuals that were initially targeted. It was blacks, because they had originally said, it started in Africa with the green monkey, and they were alleging that blacks were having sex with these monkeys, and this is how it was transmitted.
Yes,
Do you remember that now?
Well, once I started studying it, they had, grown up and started saying, no, it was actually, basically that when this virus jump species was actually coincided with a time where bushmeat was like being relied upon, like almost at an industrial level in Africa, where they were actually slaughtering, I think like apes, great apes specifically, but also, all types of primates for meat due to different like famines in the different, regional areas. And that was actually what happened, because of the bloody conditions you would be in, where you're slaughtering a monkey carcass, and then you're easily cutting yourself, and blood's getting into your mucous membranes, etc. And that was the actual most likely the route that it took to get into humans. But and they always have to give you something new, like so why didn't it jump before? Why is this a new thing? And because the bushmeat trade was at an all-time high at the time. That was their explanation, as opposed to the ridiculous notion that they were screwing monkeys. Which, like the Chinese do with this whole thing now, at first we were told it was because they were eating fruit bats, right? And they said that it was that was how this new virus, SARS, jumped species, which I'm not saying doesn't have anything to do with the zoonotic transfer, but it's funny how it always starts out with something like that, some derogatory explanation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my mic was on mute here. Yes, that's absolutely right. Well, I think this would be a good time before we run a couple of video clips that I would like those who have tuned in with us tonight to see, so they can see we're not making this up. We're going to have some biologists comment on this, some doctors who study health and the outcomes of things like this. Just a couple of quick clips. I'm not saying they're the end all be all. We want you guys to do your own investigation, prove this out to yourself, but just some clips to give you an idea that we're not just like pulling this out of whole cloth or only trying to show one side of it, because we're going to cover some other things as we go on in our discussion this evening. But when I remembered that about the Black folk being tried, that it happened with them so-called having sex with these monkeys and then got transmitted, you should have heard the absolute vitriolic hatred that was spewed against Blacks. They always tried to table it as from Africa kind of thing, but being that that's where our ancestors came from, we knew it was a swipe at us as well. But this is what they tried to do. It lasted for a little while, and then it shifted to the homosexual community. And being out here, that I'm in California, we have one of I think it's the second gay capital of the world, which is San Francisco. Tel Aviv is supposed to be the first. But it was big out here. Because, see, there were people who were in other areas that weren't necessarily affected. If you didn't have a community that was so-called high in the number of homosexuals. For example, we have another city out here that a lot of people don't know, Long Beach. 1 in 4 people in Long Beach self-identify as homosexual. So you're talking about 25% of the population. That's a high number. So being that I grew up in that area, this was a big deal. And people were scared out of their minds because they didn't know what to believe. Now, coming from the Christian perspective and believing and trusting in the Lord's protection, that did help me some. But initially, it was being a young person. I didn't know what to believe. And this stuff was leading like headline news, nightly news. I mean, news flashes every hour or so about the latest updates and horrific stories. And then you started seeing people that were coming out with infections like Kimberly Bergalis. I'll never forget her story, where she was a dental patient and supposedly had been infected by her dentist. And here you had someone dying prematurely, but she was also on these drugs. We're going to get to that in a moment about what was really doing the damage to these people. Was it this so-called HIV that led to AIDS, or was it the drugs, or what was considered to be the cure, that was actually killing these people? Possibly. We're asking questions.
And now, just so you guys know, we're not saying that's the only thing, because there's a lot of other factors that would lead up, like that would cause people to get what we call AIDS. But the HIV diagnosis in a otherwise healthy person would lead them to get on these medications, which would then destroy their immune system. But I wanted to also add real quick, Lisa, it still disproportionately affects Black people, because that's one of the risk factors in the historical data that they take when they test you. Your race, if you're Black, that's one of the things that causes your results to be analyzed in a certain way. Because as we know, it's not a test that's yes or no, it's quantitative, non-standardized, and affected by if you say that yes, you're an IV drug user, you were an IV drug user, are you Black, are you gay, are you a virgin, things like that. That actually factors into whether you come out negative or positive.
You're absolutely right. And when I say that listen, let me adjust that statement. When I say that the focus shifted, let's put it this way. Who they were targeting, in my never to be humble opinion, kind of went underground. The public focus then shifted to what I believe, as you were saying, what may have ended up being a political agenda concerning homosexuals later on, concerning the sympathy that was garnered, etc., to push further agendas down the line. But initially, It was Black people, and that did not stop. And I remember people that were grossly affected, some of which lost their lives because they went down, they tested, and they may have been in one of these groups, as you're saying, that hit all of these so-called targets. First of all, they were Black. Second, they were an HIV, or a IV drug user. Third, they may have been homosexual. So then if they started having where they hit all these different targets, 3 or 4 or 5 factors, they would get a positive test result.
Right.
And then start taking these drugs. But then also, this is something I keep trying to point out to people. The fear that was behind this. I'm talking about fear where people couldn't sleep, people couldn't eat, fear gripping people. How that affects your immune system is huge.
I'll never forget when my mom, so I know when she, I didn't know at the time, but then thinking back, and my mom explained it to me, I remember the day that she found out, and she was really, really upset. It was right on Christmas, and she had come, her and my dad were divorced, but they stayed really, really close. She was visiting us, I was up with my aunt in Fort Myers. We were all, my dad's side family's all there. He brought her up there because he had been helping her get some, they didn't tell me what, some medical treatment, supposedly to do with something with her eye. And she was so upset. I have a picture from that day. Because I wasn't giving her much attention. I was playing. I was running around playing, and I had no idea. But she didn't want to tell me what she really, what was really wrong. So she was talking something about how she might lose sight in one eye. Some story they cooked up about what my dad was helping her get treatment for. And I'll just never forget, that was when everything changed for my mom, and it was really soul destroying. I mean, I know my mom was like the greatest little, these risk factors. I mean, she did use cocaine in the 80s, but she wasn't an IV drug user. And she wasn't like a prostitute or anything. She wasn't gay. Which this, I'll explain why I believe she was targeted later, but, she was just a perfectly healthy pregnant woman. She was pregnant with my little brother, with my stepdad, and they tested her, and you're 70 times more likely to get a positive result on this bogus test on your, any multiple pregnancy. So when you've been pregnant before, your second pregnancy, whatever, because of the proteins that they test for to HIV or retroviruses, but they thought claimed they were back a long time ago, and they've just never changed it once they've already proven that they're natural in the human body, especially in placenta. So it totally destroys. I've seen the way when your immune system, just worrying about getting the virus for one, but then once you're told from a test result that you have this killer virus, even if you don't take medication, it's just gonna destroy you. I mean, it destroyed my mom. She was just extremely self-destructive from then on out. It was very difficult. And she was the sweetest, most loving, safe believer. But this was like her life was over, and the medications made her so sick, and she didn't want to take them, And so this is what's the evil that this is doing, because it might affect a lot of people that are already, they've throttled their immune system from what they're doing and their lifestyle or the drugs they're taking. But then there's plenty of people that are perfectly healthy that get this result, and it ruins their life, and it becomes self-fulfilling.
That's right. I know that, sister. I saw that. I've witnessed that with other people, and what they went through. And I think any of us who knew, if we didn't know people, you heard horror stories from other people that knew people. I mean, I don't think you can go two or three people away before you know someone who was grossly affected by the HIV/AIDS and what happened in the 80s behind this, and the hysteria and the fear and what it did to people. I don't think anyone wasn't affected in some way, shape, or form, even if it was just being gripped, even initially, by the fear that this created for people. I think, Brother Matthias, if you're ready to go, with the first video clip, this would be a good place to play that, because I want people to see this biologist and what she had to say. This is years and years later, after this damage had been done to people. Brother Matthias, let me know when you're ready to go with that, so that you can see we're not making this up. There are scientists who have come out. There are documentaries, and I'm going to put the links in the description. There's still a few more I have to post, but I have several of them up already. You guys can go see these videos with these world-renowned scientists and biologists coming out and going.
Nobel Prize winner.
Yes, Nobel Prize winners. Multiple that have said this was one of the biggest crimes against humanity, and that it was actually genocide. They use that word.
And I just want to say to you guys, I'm the last person that should want to believe what we're proposing here tonight, because not only did was I complicit in my mother, like when we eventually did, talk about it, and I knew she had it, that I would pressure her to take her medicine when she wanted to get off of them because they made her so miserable. She'd rather die than live on those. I would threaten to never speak to her again. And I'd even carry through with my threat temporarily when I found out she wasn't taking them. I pretty much, blackmail her into taking these medications, along with my best friend Cody, who was quote unquote born with HIV. He died 2 years after my mother, and he was living with me at the right before he died. And he had stopped taking his medication, and I made even my mother browbeat him to get back on his medications. I was like very important in his life. I was like a big sister. I took him to doctors. And when he did finally get back on them, they shut his kidneys down and he died. So if this is all true, what we're saying tonight, I accidentally helped kill my mother and my best friend. So I should not be, this doesn't serve me any emotional purpose like that of denial or anything, just to say these things to you guys. This just makes me feel like a murderer, but it's true. It's true. And that's all that matters.
Well, sister, while I certainly can understand why there would be guilt associated because you encouraged your mother, thinking, remember now, your intent was you thought you were helping your mother. Mother, please take your medications. We did not know. And I've had other situations with family members, while it wasn't AZT or any of these so-called drugs for HIV/AIDS, encouraged family members to follow the medical protocols. And I watched healthy people who otherwise received a diagnosis that were otherwise healthy, but they received a diagnosis, did everything the doctors said, and got sicker and sicker and sicker until they were dead. So, Brother Matthias, if you're ready to go, are you ready to roll that clip?
Ready when you are.
Please go ahead.
I'm talking today to the Austrian-German biologist Christl Meyer, who has proven that the HIV virus does not exist. Christl, could you tell us something about your qualifications, please?
I studied at the University of Marburg in Germany, and I studied chemistry, biochemistry, biology, and I did my scientific work in medical microbiology concerning virus and antibodies.
And this research brought you to look at the HIV virus, and you discovered there is no such thing. Is that correct?
It was later that I did my research on AIDS and HIV, but with this background, it was very interesting for me to do research in this area.
And you found out that what looks like the HIV virus is actually a gene in our immune system.
Yes, I found out by doing research when I taught the students in Belize, Central America, in microbiology, that the genes of our immune system, which are called human leukocyte antigen genes, are the cause for testing positive, because they are very variable, and by gene expression we produce RNA and proteins, and these just make the test positive. But nothing is coming from outside, it's a production from inside, and it does not mean that we are sick or have a disease.
Another problem you point out is that the HIV tests are not standardized.
Yes, the tests are not standardized. They vary all over the world. So you can take a test in Africa and fly with your result to France. If you were tested positive in Africa, you are negative in France. And let's say you test positive in Germany, go with your result to Australia, there you would be named negative.
So the whole HIV testing system is totally capricious.
Yes, it is, because there's no standard. A virus has never been proved, and without a standard, you cannot really establish a test system. And the tests vary all over the world, and they change from time to time.
So, Christl, what is your view of the treatment for this non-existent virus? Does it actually harm people?
The medical treatment in the beginning was really hard because it was a high doses of ACT, acetotumidine, and this really disturbs DNA, and this was a problem for those who had to take the medication because they died of the drugs. And now the drugs today, we have more drugs, but they are not as hard as before. But as there is no virus, we have to treat just the diseases people have, because there is no new disease. It's just old diseases with new name.
So you are saying the treatment could...
All right, that's the 339.
Okay. We couldn't hear it, guys, but I want you to know we've listened to it. We're familiar with it. The points that they made, I wanted you to hear from people. The one reason I wanted Brother Matthias to start the video at the beginning so you could hear this woman's credentials. This is not just somebody who's fly by night. I wanted you to hear her credentials. I wanted you to hear what she had to say about this matter and how she said that what we were saying this evening, she is seconding our emotion, but she beat us to it because this was years before. This was years after the AIDS crisis and years before we discovered the truth. Okay, so I wanted you guys to hear it so you know we're not just pulling this out of our hat tonight. Okay,
No,
and Brother Matthias, go ahead, sister.
I just wanted to let you know I couldn't actually figure out how to watch that. I was afraid it would play through my headset if I watched in the chat, and I can't get to the call. You know, like where I mute. I don't know where that is on my phone. It's like not, the Hangouts is being weird, so I didn't actually get to see the clip. So you can just summarize it, whatever. I think I've seen it before, but I didn't actually get to see it. So.
Well, yes, Christl Meyer is a biologist, and she's coming out saying how this was basically a scam. And she ends up going on later in the video and explaining how the drugs, I think I stopped it right when we're getting to the best part because I want you to go watch it for yourselves. But she said enough information to show you that we're not just pulling this information out of a box somewhere. This is true and it's real. And I'm going to put another a video link in the description on, as Sister Angel was saying, world-renowned Nobel Prize winner, multiple Nobel Prize winners. It's roughly a 2-hour video that this gentleman, he straight says this was genocide, and it was beyond a hoax. It was criminal. It was evil what was done to people because of the hype that was created and what it led people to end up doing. Remember now, not everybody was affected by these drugs. Some people committed suicide because they thought they were going to have such a horrible life once they got these diagnoses. Don't forget those people either. There were people who victimized other people that they thought were infected, that they thought could infect them. Crimes were committed against those people. There was all kinds of craziness and hysteria that went on as a result of people, literal criminality associated with framing something, tying something to it that had no substantial facts in reality, no medical conclusion, basis, and proof. And then they pushed these drugs on the public who took it and died as a result.
Right. And then the mothers now, if you test positive while you're pregnant, as dumb as it is to test women who are pregnant because of the false positive risk, whatever false positive means on a bogus test, but false, what even they'll admit is a huge risk of a false positive. If you don't want to take these DNA chain terminating, protease inhibitors and like the drugs, the cocktail that were, which is really just chemotherapy. That's all it is. It was too deadly for use in human. They shelved it after they decided to throw this ATT at people, and really all they've ever done is dilute the strength of the drug and create things that are all based around the same chemotherapy principle. And these women are forced, if they don't want to take these drugs, they're forced to medicate their children or have them taken away. And if you don't even believe anything we're saying tonight, just please don't get tested while you're pregnant, because it makes no difference. It really won't make a difference. Even without the medication, after they're born, even if they test positive for these antibodies, they clear them on their own. So there's the only thing you could really get out of testing while you're pregnant is the risk of not having the liberty to make your own decision as to how you treat yourself and your child. But these are extremely toxic drugs, and you do not want to take them while you're pregnant. I mean, it's just unthinkable. So I really strongly advise that. That's one of the worst tolls. That for me, that's the one that makes me cry and keeps me up at night, is thinking about pregnant women. Because they'll be tested more routinely than other people without the risk factors. See, because it's just done while you're pregnant. So it really exposes otherwise, women that would not ever come across an HIV diagnosis or AIDS to the risk of it, because they do it routinely while pregnant.
Right. And if I remember correctly, because we couldn't hear it, guys, and I had to go by memory. I believe the Lord, thank you, Holy Spirit, just brought it back to my remembrance. The very end of that clip, the biologist Christl Meyer says there are no new viruses or no new diseases. She said there's no new diseases. And I asked Brother Matthias to put up Ecclesiastes for us, Brother Matthias. Ecclesiastes 1:9. Ecclesiastes 1:9. I'm going to go ahead and read that real quick because I'm not sure if Brother Matthias fell asleep at the switch. No, he's probably trying to get it working very hard. It says, the thing that had been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Now I want you guys to let that marinate for a minute. Meditate on that for a minute, because every time they come out with one of these so-called new viruses or new strains or new flu epidemic of some sort, they try to gin up all this fear, but the Bible says there is nothing new. So what are they trying to make us afraid for?
And even
I want you to
go ahead. Even the virus is not even if you buy into the rest of the narrative, he is not human. That's easily proven by the way that they look at these genetic studies and figure out how long it's been in the human population. So it's not even new to the human population, but somehow supposedly it's causing this new illness, which is really just a series of old illnesses that's all just blamed on HIV now, which otherwise would have been its own illness, like tuberculosis.
Right. And I've heard this said by, I don't recall which scientist many years ago, that all of these so-called diseases can be traced back to 39 root diseases. And if you remember, the Bible says that by his stripes we are healed. And that's exactly how many stripes did Jesus received. So y'all don't feed into the fear that they're trying to pump on us, because the first thing you should do is not be running to the doctor, is call on the Lord. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord Jesus shall be saved. Who is the Lord? Jesus Christ is Lord. See, Philippians 2:9-11. The Bible declares who the Lord is. And sorry if you're listening to this program and you don't like that. I'm sorry for you. I don't make apologies for that because it's the truth of the word of the living God. We're believers here. And if we don't believe this thing, then what are you doing here? We need to call on the... Even if we're wrong about all of this, call on the Lord first.
Yeah, he won't punish you for accidentally being too skeptical about, like say you go away from this, you don't believe in, you're dubious of all viruses, right? And you say, I'm just going to trust you, Lord, instead. These doctors, whatever. Lord's not gonna punish you for trusting him too much.
Now, Sister Angel, you made a great point on this punishment thing because Sister Celine brought something up. And I don't think she's old enough to remember this. So I'm not mad at her for suggesting this. Because she said she thought this might be a punishment from the Lord on homosexuals or maybe even other people who have found themselves in it. Now, this is not an attack on Sister Celine. Not at all. Leave her alone. Because this was a big thing in the church. When I was coming up, you had preachers like Hagee, and I'm going to say the ones that I remember that were saying this was, the other dude, he's gone. He passed away. The Liberty University, the religious right, the moral majority and all that.
Oh, yeah. Him.
He came out and said it was a judgment against homosexuals. And he wasn't the only one. I'm not picking on him. There were numerous ones. You probably can find clips on YouTube with all these guys.
Jerry Falwell.
Yes, Jerry Falwell with the moral majority. He came out and said this was a judgment against homosexuals and all basically drug addicts and all this for being wicked and all this stuff. And beloved, this is not the Lord. Okay, the Lord don't have nothing to do with hypes and lies and finesse. I keep trying to tell people when the Lord pours out his wrath, that's in the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ, ain't gonna be no mistaking who's doing it. It's gonna be so magnificent that people are going to be astonished. The Bible says men's hearts are going to fail them for fear because it's going to be a judgment against the wicked for the evil they've done and what they've done to his people. See Joel chapter 3 for that. Now, beloved, I'm telling you, this was not a judgment, quote unquote, from the Lord. God's not running around going, I'm going to punish you.
And
however,
it's a consequence.
It's a concept. Thank you very much. Because sin is an accursed thing. That's what I keep trying to tell people. That's why we keep telling Christians, don't think you can have a pet sin and think you can stroke that thing and lick all over that thing like ice cream. And there's no consequence. There is. With liberty comes great responsibility. This is what they don't tell you. Yeah, you can go do whatever you want. This is what Paul said. All things are lawful, but all things are not expedient. All things are not good. I can go play on the freeway if I want to, but guess how that's going to turn out, especially if you're fat and slow. So, beloved, it's not that anyone is indicting anyone. People place themselves in precarious positions, but here's the thing. When you believe a lie, this is what I keep warning you about being in agreement with Christ. Don't receive demonic pronouncements and curses from people. I don't care if they're wearing white coats and a stethoscope. Be in agreement with the Lord and what he says about you, because maybe, just maybe, you're receiving a demonic pronouncement and curse. And if you get in agreement with it, whether it's true or not, you have mixed faith with that thing. And it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you are afraid, that fear has torment. And if you don't believe, I don't want you to believe me. Do some research on what fear does to the human body. That fear translates into stress. Stress can kill you. If you are so overwhelmed with stress, it could make a person, God forbid, have a stroke, a heart attack, and a number of other things. This is why we're doing this tonight, because we want to bring calm to people. But if you're being lied, if it's possible that you're being lied to, we're telling you, take a step back, take a deep breath. Seek the Lord first, ask him for his guidance and his direction, and then examine the facts. Go ahead, Sister Angel.
Sorry, yeah. By the time I was 18, I looked like Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street. I had the gray streak in my temple from the stress that I endured about my mom. I truly believe that, because there was like a 2-year period even where I had heard she had moved to Texas, and I had heard that she was not taking care of herself, not taking her medicine, and she was sick, and she's not doing good. And I wouldn't talk to her. In fact, I buried her in my mind. I decided she was going to die any day, and that I might as well just get it over with in my own heart now and stop. I was afraid if I answered the phone or talked to her, I was just going to hear bad news that she was in the hospital dying. And so I psyched myself out so bad, because I thought for sure she was dying. And this is the way that this stupid lie lives with you. I buried her. It was ever a reality. And she didn't have to die at that time. And I this was the worst 2 years of my life. I had, I really convinced myself that she was dead or dying, and that there was just no point. Because I was angry too. Understand, I was angry with her because I blamed her for not taking care of herself. And that was, was her fault. Because she got so self-destructive with like cocaine and just, she just real chaotic decisions and just stupid little things she would do, little harebrained schemes. And she would, and she just would stop her meds. And one thing I do also want to explain really quickly, in terms of, some people might say, well, wait a minute, what is it intrinsic about like homosexuality or really even drug use that makes a special consequence of something like immune deficiency? Well, and I want to explain this. For one thing, and this isn't pretty, but it is necessary to talk about because it really is a big part of our argument. Receptive anal sex is extremely, extremely bad for your immune system. It is an assault on your immune system, because there was not ever anything supposed to go, right? The mucous membrane in your rectum is very thin, and it doesn't have a whole lot of defenses, right? So if you are engaging in receptive anal sex, you are, especially you are being exposed to tons of foreign proteins and microbes and all that you would otherwise not be exposed to, and also that in an area where your body does not have natural defenses to deal with it, especially with the tearing and abrasions that occur. So you're going against God's natural design, so you don't have the natural protections you would otherwise be afforded, right? And then drug use. Even if you're using clean drugs, let's say you're not using some meth off the street or some heroin from Mexico transported here in like a donkey's, dead donkey's gut or whatever. Even if you're not using all of that, even if you're just using pharmaceuticals, just the water that you would be dissolving these pills in, just the pills themselves, they have tons of proteins and contaminants in them that you're directing into your own bloodstream directly. And your bloodstream, believe it or not, does not have the best immune defense system. You have your white blood cells, but the mucous membrane, your back, that is where naturally you would be exposed to these things. Right. Your immune system fight off. Your bloodstream is not supposed to have things injected directly into it. That's why vaccines are such a problem. But so when so basically people that have especially very promiscuous gay lifestyles, is the original group that was first identified as suffering from this phenomenon they called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. This was like a particularly they called it the fast track gay lifestyle, where they were either using a lot of drugs like poppers, or they were, I remember hearing the average sexual partners in the community was like 1,000. And there was like a bathhouse scene there at the time. But even just the drug use that was going on, like with the amyl nitrates, was really bad. So that was enough to really throttle your immune system. They were also taking antibiotics unnecessarily, prophylactically, hoping to prevent contracting some of these STDs that they were sure to expose themselves to. So there was a number of other things that I won't get into, but then also with IV drug users, because they are just injecting themselves with all of this all the time, the in their blood are very high, just naturally. And that it really predisposes you to a false positive on these tests, because the tests are for, they're not actually testing for virus when they test you for HIV. They're testing you for antibodies supposedly associated with HIV or retroviruses in general. And the more antibodies that you have as a result of your exposing yourself in this way, that's very bad for your body with the injections. This is also the same for hemophiliacs. Then the more likely you are to test positive. So it's beautiful conception. That, like, to me, sometimes I think only Satan could have conceived of it, because in so many different directions, this the circumstances of, you know, the people that are typically targeted are so conducive to actually getting a positive result on this test and also getting these diseases. And then on top of that, even if they don't have any of those, you know, they didn't have any of these problems already when they tested positive or any risk factors, the drug itself, the drugs that they use as a side effect produce AIDS, you know, immunodeficiency. You know, chemotherapy patients have AIDS, essentially. They have no immune system. That's what it is.
Sister Angel, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. What does AIDS stand for again? It's AIDS. What is that?
Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome.
So, wow. Now, I don't know who came up with that name. Do you remember who coined that or came up with that? Because it seems
my
pretty...
best guess would be Fauci, it might be Anthony Fauci, who, by the way, is our brave hero, who's, you know, helping the CDC, in charge of the allergy and infectious disease department of the CDC. Whole mess with, you know, SARS Part 2. So he was the one who originated, like he did the press release. Oh, we figured out, you know, I figured out what causes AIDS, and it's HIV, you know, and so he's definitely complicit. There's a lot of doctors who don't know any better. He knows because there's a long story with him, but he was sued for basically stealing a virus that the Pasteur Institute in France had already identified. And he claimed it for his own and said it produced AIDS. But so I think he named it. I could be wrong.
Well, Sister Angel, I'm going to ask a question. Maybe it's a little rhetorical, maybe even redundant at this point, but acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is it possible that the reason the acquired immune deficiency syndrome happened is because they were taking the drugs that caused acquired immune deficiency syndrome?
Exactly. Well, right. Exactly. And doing the practicing the behaviors that predispose them to this in the first place, which is why also conveniently for Africa, they slapped an AIDS epidemic on them too, which, you know, poverty and malnutrition cause acquired immune deficiency syndrome. But guess what? The criteria for an AIDS diagnosis is totally different in Africa, totally different disease. And by the way, depending on what country you're tested in or even what lab, the test isn't standardized. So you can be tested here and then go to Canada. You can be positive here, negative in Canada, vice versa. And if you actually look how anyone determines whether you have HIV or not, you'd be appalled that you ever took the test. Do you realize what a gamble it was to take that test?
Roulette. Like playing Russian roulette. And it's funny that you say that, sister, because it shows you guys and gals out there in the listening audience that Sister Angel did not hear the video clip that I played, or excuse me, that Brother Matthias ran for us of the biologist Christl, darn it, her name is escaping me now.
Christl Meyer.
Meyer, thank you. She didn't hear that clip, and she just reiterated what this biologist stated in the clip, that there was no standardized test, which should have been a huge red flag to anyone who was paying attention. For example, if you break a bone, I'm just going to keep this simply basic that a 10-year-old can understand it, maybe even a 5-year-old. If you break a bone, there's a standard procedure that is done when you go to the hospital, when they treat you, that they're going to do as a course of action for the broken bone. Whether it's test for tenderness in the area, then get an x-ray, then do certain things. They didn't have standardized tests. And so you could go to Canada and get tested and test positive, fly to France, get tested and test negative, fly to Africa, test and test positive, fly to Australia, test and test negative, come back to the United States and test positive. It with the same test, because it wasn't standardized. It was just willy-nilly. They just, I think this is what'll work. How is that professional?
Well, and also, I mean, think about it, guys. It's affected by the historical data you provide. I mean, it's okay. So maybe we should talk about Koch's postulates just for a second here.
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
How you determine an infectious disease, or that it's actually that a certain microbe is causing a certain illness. And this is one of the fundamental tenets of virology and epidemiology is Koch's postulate. So the organism, the suspected organism, must present abundantly in all organisms with the disease and not present in healthy organisms, that haven't been identified as having the disease. Then it must be isolated from the disease subject and grown in a pure culture. So they have to, make more of it in a pure culture. Then they have to isolate, it. Okay, so I already go there. So then once they've isolated it, then they expose another test subject with it. So, it should cause disease when the cultured microorganism suspected of being the cause of the disease is introduced to a healthy subject. And then after that, it must be re-isolated from the inoculated and diseased host subject and deemed identical to the original causative agent. And some of the other things that these postulates go into is that, it needs to cause generally the same clinical presentation, across all suspected infected, subjects, right? Well, one of the things that I don't know if other people, especially people that were, maybe a little older than me, so they remember in the 80s, Kaposi's sarcoma, which was really, I think, what caused a lot of the attention to be like a lot of the media attention and the hype surrounding AIDS to begin, because it started out one of the big things happening.
Called a gay cancer, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was called, well, first they called it gay-related immune deficiency.
Right.
And it was like a big, a face cancer that would cause tumors on the face. Right. Now, Kaposi's sarcoma, the thing is, it's an obscure term, but like I said earlier, it was long known to be caused by amyl nitrates, aka poppers. But the thing is that women never got it. Mm-hmm. That violates one of the Koch's postulates in and of itself, but that was my first question. That was one of the things that nagged me when I was younger. I always wondered that. And so that's that's a violation of these postulates. And there's so many other things like that. The fact that it doesn't present the same in Africa. So what they did was they decided that there's two different strains. Magically. Now, I understand the first one hasn't even been properly isolated. That's very involved. But if you watch the documentaries House of Numbers or HIV Factor Fraud, they go into extensively why it's dubious as to whether Fauci ever properly isolated the virus in the first place. So that's part of the entire fundamental process of blaming a certain pathogen for a certain disease. And you have to understand how small viruses are. So that's why a lot of the time, I'm very dubious about virus tests in the first place. But the thing is, Kary Mullis is the Nobel laureate who, one of the ones we've been referring to, who has slammed dunk, just debunked this HIV equals AIDS hoax. And he is the guy who invented the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction test, which is absolutely, it's like if you ever get tested for a virus, the lab, your stuff's sent to the lab and they're doing a PCR. What they do is they take a very small amount of whatever they can, virus that they might be able to identify in your sample. And then they amplify it. They cause it to replicate so that there's more of it, essentially. And that he invented that, and it's used in the HIV test. And he is one of the biggest whistleblowers against all this. In fact, he wrote the foreword for the book, The HIV Hoax. So,
wow. So much information, and you have really helped enlighten us this evening on so much of this. I have one other clip that I would like Brother Matthias to get ready. That would be clip number 2 there, Brother Matthias, on the tie-in, to go back, just a quick glimpse, because we could go back and we could pick up from a number of other viruses that they have done this, from Ebola to the avian to swine. So we're right. Yeah, we can go all the way back. This stuff goes back decades. So this is not anything new that we're talking about. Remember, there's nothing new under the sun. And this is not a new example what we're talking about, which leads into coronavirus and what's going on present day. And they've already got something else ready, believe me, for when this is over with. But this clip is going to talk about the coronavirus, basically. The gentleman is speaking about H1N1 in particular. It's Dr. John Bergman, and he's talking about what the CDC does when it first starts and how, well, I'll let him speak for himself. Brother Matthias, are you ready to go with that clip?
Ready when you are.
Go ahead.
Neither animals or people. It's kind of similar to now to where we have a novel coronavirus. Well, there was a novel H1N1 virus back then, and they were talking about that they had to develop a virus, develop a vaccine. During this hype 11 years ago, they found out that the World Health Organization was making it a bigger deal than it really was. Okay, now whether the coronavirus is a bigger deal than it really is, or if they're hyping it up, we don't know yet. But this is looking 11 years in retrospective. The H1N1 strain, it was a novel strain, just like the novel coronavirus. And then we look, stating the response to the World Health Organization and mass media conclusions, overestimating and exaggerating the problem, and provoked unnecessary alarm among the general population rather than transmitting calm and a sense of safety. How does that sound today? That the World Health Organization, all the media outlets are not transmitting calm safety, they're promoting a panic. But let's look, because this is not our first pandemic scare frightening thing. It goes on every few years. We know the swine flu in 2002, the SARS in 2003, avian flu in 2006, Mideast respiratory syndrome, okay, and that was a coronavirus in 2012, Ebola 2014, the Disney measles fiasco in 2015, Zika. So we're looking every few years, we have these panics. And of course, Dr. Tim O'Shea, brilliant. I recommend you go to his drwithin.com site, great information. But he calls them boutique epidemics. And sure enough, claim a disease or a threat from a new bug in an exotic location. Bam, you got it. Then install worldwide panic with unrelenting media. And that's exactly what we have today.
We're at your 240 mark.
Okay, guys, I just wanted you to hear for yourself what the CDC is supposed to do, that Dr. Bergman talked about, which is calm the public's fears, give them information, disseminate it in a timely manner that tells them the truth about what's going on without over-sensationalizing, over-hyping things. Sister Angel, I know you didn't get to hear that right now. Did you get a chance to hear that earlier?
I watched it on YouTube just now.
Okay. I encourage the audience. The link is in the description for you to go listen to the whole presentation. He also has a complete, this is only an 11-minute clip for the presentation that I put in the clip, but I'm also going to include his full presentation that's over 50 minutes long on why you shouldn't be afraid about this thing. And it's very good, very important information. He also includes at the end of this video, for those of you who want the short version, how to take care of your immune system and what to do to strengthen it so that you won't be come victim to something like this in the future. And that's what we wanted to do tonight, was to help calm people down, help provide some information to put things in context that they're not telling you on these 30 and 45 and 60-second sound bites that are scaring people half to death. And that's what tonight's broadcast. And the reason we started with HIV AIDS, while it wasn't even the biggest one that killed the most people, it was the one that was the most hyped about and had people just in absolute terror. Okay, so we started with this one because it was the most well-known. Most people remember it. And it was a way to put this and frame this in context that we're supposed to calm our hearts and our minds. Y'all read Psalm 91. it talks about pestilences, the walk in darkness, and that 1,000 might fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. Believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, do you believe this stuff? Because if not, you wasting your time, you playing with yourself, you might as well be doing something else. But if you believe this stuff, then we're supposed to be getting in agreement with the Lord and his word. He has made proclamations of provision and protection because we are his children and our faith in him. So, beloved, calm your hearts, calm your minds. Don't believe the hype. Investigate for yourself. We're not telling you to believe anything we've said tonight. We want you to investigate these things out for yourself. Sister Angel, we're going to have to go to questions in a few minutes.
Okay.
Brother Matthias, if you could go ahead and put up those clips as we're speaking here, that would be fine. Numbers 1 through 4, leave them up for maybe a minute or two and then switch to the next one, just so they can get an idea for those people who may be watching this and not able to go to the description of the links right now and want to get a little taste of what we're talking about.
Before the questions, I thought maybe it would be a good idea for me to quickly summarize some, because we've missed a couple of the really obvious proofs against this, and I have a little list real quick that I want to present so that they can ask questions about it. So, for one thing, supposedly the test, the HIV test, it tests for antibodies. What are antibodies? They are the proteins that are produced by your immune system when exposed to an invader that match. They're basically like the key to the lock of the virus, or vice versa, right? So they match, and they will antibodies are able to mount a defense and actually destroy the virus or whatever pathogen they've identified in your body, right? So once you create antibodies are essentially what a vaccine is supposed to do. It's supposed to help your body create antibodies without actually having to fight off the virus first. So it's amazing to me that nobody ever thinks about the fact that so we're looking for antibodies for HIV. And now typically that's okay if you're looking for, like, say, flu antibodies or something. Well, the person, has the flu, they're producing the antibodies, and, whether they're still sick or not, they're on their way to health now because their antibodies are there. But hopefully this is a virus that death eventually, because it destroys your immune system, and your immune system has no way of fighting it off, yet it's produced the antibodies. So that's ridiculous right there on its face. But then, we've already gone over the non-standardized quantitative test instead of qualitative. So it's not a yes or no, HIV or no HIV. It's how much HIV do you have, essentially, which is scary. And also the fact that it's affected by your historical data, that's not scientific at all, especially, at least not in terms of virology. It never spread beyond the original risk groups. So although we do have unfortunate cases like my mother, or like my I guess, my friend Cody, he would have qualified as somebody in a risk group because he was born to heroin addicted parents. So that's how they got HIV. And by the time he was 4, he got tested. He tested positive for these antibodies, and they started medicating him. And he died when he was 20 from kidney failure after going off the medication and getting back on them, and they destroyed his kidneys. Because, and that is something I do want to touch on really quickly. So what happens, for me, I watched my mother go on and off with these things. I saw this happen with Cody. And it's so genius, because what happens when a person takes these meds for a long time, their immune system is effectively destroyed. And the only thing functioning in place of that immune system now are these incredibly toxic chemotherapy drugs that kill anything in sight. It's not specific. They kill, if the virus there, and they're the only defense you have. They're the only hope you have once your immune system is gone. So when you stop taking them, if you just abruptly stop taking them, amazing. Guess what? You come down with all these opportunistic infections that seem to prove the idea that you do have AIDS. If it can't be the meds that are making me sick, because now I stopped taking them, and now I've got all these supposedly AIDS-specific, AIDS-defining illnesses, like, toxoplasmosis and all this stuff that other people don't normally get unless they have AIDS, right? Or chemo patients, by the way. And and then when you get back on the meds, those infections go away. And it seems like magic. Well, I contacted Dr. Peter Duesberg, former head of the NIH virology department, the man who very bravely, he was the top expert in the whole world in retroviruses. He was the reason that he was studying retroviruses in regards to like whether they could cause cancer. And the first thing he noticed when supposedly HIV had been identified as the cause of AIDS, a retrovirus, is how impossible that would be, because retroviruses had always been known to cause cell multiplication, not cell death. They don't cause cell death. That's why they were being looked at as a cause of cancer. So for him, it was ridiculous that suddenly they thought that HIV, which he regards as a harmless passenger virus, was killing cells when that's not what retroviruses do, hence why they're investigated as a possible cancer virus. So anyway, he bravely spoke out, and he was like the only one at first. And of course, he lost his position. They tried to destroy him professionally, but he actually answered my question. Why did the medication seem to help my mom when she would get back on them? And he said, because she didn't have an immune system. So when they put her back on the chemo that killed her immune system in the first place, it would kill the opportunistic infections, but it would still begin slowly killing her all over again. And there's a way to get off of that, but you have to very carefully and very slowly rebuild your immune system over time, and take she would just willy-nilly get off of them, just like Cody did. And so that's one of the biggest things that the really clever little tricks with this whole lie is that it really does. If you test the theory that the meds cause it, if you don't know better, you'll go and you'll think, nope, never mind. The meds were the thing saving their life, and look at all of the AIDS they got as soon as they stopped. All right. So then also we have the fact that needle sticks in medical, medical professionals like doctors and nurses, when they get the needle sticks, which happens a lot with an HIV patient, unless they get on AZT, let's say get on the drugs, rarely, if ever, do they actually progress to AIDS. And a lot of them don't get on the drug. They'll test positive, but they don't get on the drugs. So that's one of the best control groups you can get. But see, they don't engage in the behaviors that destroy the immune system. Typically, they don't take the meds. And then we have the fact that a doctor in the early 90s, his name escapes me. He's in a lot of these documentaries that we're going to list here, like HIV Factor Fraud, House of Numbers. He repeatedly injected himself with HIV patients' blood. He would hold press conferences trying to prove that this is not the cause of AIDS. And he's never tested seropositive. He's never gotten a positive HIV test, which is amazing anyway, because it would eventually transmit to him. But that's how not infectious it is. So, but he's certainly never gotten AIDS either. And then one of the things that's really weird is that it supposedly goes dormant, right? So you've heard maybe people that are non-detectable, undetectable. I know my mother and Cody both, my mother especially, was undetectable even up until her death. So that means you test negative. They can't find the virus in you. And I know Cody was undetectable maybe up until his death, but at least when I first met him. And they claim that this is the success of the medication, right? Making you undetectable because it's suppressing the virus. Well, they're also claiming at the same time that the virus is somehow continuing to destroy your immune cells. And when does it? How does it make sense that a negative test, and just with HIV, a negative test does not mean cure, right? Repeated negative tests. My mother was tested constantly and never tested positive for this. Wow. For the vast majority of her life, she died from an aortic aneurysm, which is a known side effect of the medication after long-term use from the high blood pressure it causes. Being internally for about a year in terrible pain before she finally bled out from this hemorrhage, and they wouldn't operate on her. They said it wasn't ballooned enough, but she was on Medicaid and had HIV. So they, doctors really, I think, they want those people to die. She was like a throwaway person in their minds. And but so it goes dormant in your system to where it can't even be detected. And yet somehow it's also, the virus has to be present in abundance in your system to do the damage. How could, say, let's say that typically a full-blown AIDS person would have 100 parts per million virus. And then suddenly when you have 0.05 parts per million in your blood sample, somehow it's still doing all this destruction despite not having enough of itself to spread around and destroy things. There's way more of your CD4 cells being produced than the virus. If there's just a scant few particles, they can't even find it in your body. And yet they say it's a lifelong illness that,
Right.
there's no cure for. Even though you produce the antibodies in the first place, they're supposed to take care of it. So those are just a few points that people can chew on and ask questions about that I wanted to get to. There's a lot more. There's so much more. This is a slam dunk, guys. It's a slam dunk if you look into it. There's just no argument. There's no argument for a HIV causing AIDS. There isn't.
Yeah, Brother Ben had mentioned in the chat a while back about Magic Johnson and how he has been able to survive with HIV all of these years. And, but we contrast that to other people who took the drugs purportedly and are no longer with us.
He doesn't pass it on either, as far as I know. They say he's never passed it to anybody.
That's right.
Yeah, he's held up as like, I don't know. Do they claim he takes the medication? That's what I wasn't ever sure if they claim he takes them.
Initially, in the first few years after his diagnosis, in different press conferences, I recall him being asked about that, how he had managed to survive, let's say 10 years past diagnosis. And he did claim that he was taking the drugs. Now, there are other people that argue that he was spirited away to some doctors in Africa that knew the truth and told him the truth, but he's never publicly said after claiming that he was taking the drugs that he didn't. So I'm unaware. If anyone has the information as to that, please let us know. We'll be happy to include it. I'll include the link to the article or whatever in the description, in fairness to Mr. Johnson. But the last that I recall, he stated he had taken the drugs. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that would explain what purpose he serves. Shining example of perfect health, even though he's been on the drugs for all this time. Yeah. I've seen them kill a 20-year-old because he had just been on them since he was 4. My mom died, I think it was like 22 years after she started them. I don't know a whole lot of people that have been on those meds longer than that have lived. In fact, I can't think of one who's actually consistently been on the typical meds they prescribe that have been on them for that long consistently and are still alive or not, dying. My mom's, her hair texture changed. She was an absolute drop dead knockout, beautiful woman. And I always wondered what happened, like, why did her hair changed? I mean, and now I understand they're DNA chain terminators, but like her hair was like mine, like soft, fine, dark, all that. And then somehow after, being on the meds for about 10 years, her hair was like wiry. And it wasn't gray, it wasn't brown. It's like there was just no color. It was so strange. She had this weird growth above her lip, and never any AIDS defining illnesses aside from shingles. She had shingles a couple of times, but that's it. And it's just, Cody. He was pretty young and healthy. But the thing was once he got off those medications, when he got back on them, they put him on a different kind of, it was like, same family, but it was just different, slightly different kind and different strength. And it caused this renal failure where he was on dialysis for like the last year of his life. And he was so, like, keep in mind, he thought he was dying his whole life since he was 4. His parents had died. And they were like, at least one of them overdosed, but they were a mess. And he was raised by his grandmother. He thought he was dying his whole life. So it made him just this incredible person. Any one of you listening, I promise you, had Cody met you, he would have honestly wanted to hear everything about you. He was like a little angel person. The only way I can describe him. And because something about thinking you're dying your whole life, I really think it just had an effect on him that made him really appreciate things that other people don't. And
Right.
I guess he was so depressed and heartbroken about the dialysis. And he was a very handsome boy. And after this last time where he got off the meds, and he didn't just get off the meds though. He got off the meds and then he went across country camping with those rainbow people, those hippies. I mean, he was just trying to live his life, right? and he got all these crazy, like dumb skin infections and stuff, and his foot swelled up really bad, and because he didn't have an immune system anymore, thanks to the medication. He was never sick when he was a kid, and he got on the meds. Keep that in mind, and you'll notice that's a trend. Like, get on the meds because of a test that's positive, but no illness at the time.
Right.
And then
Right.
he was so depressed that he just wouldn't didn't take very long, maybe like a week. So he pretty much committed suicide. Pretty much. Because he just didn't want to do it anymore. That's not how he wanted to live. So.
Right, because well, you end up being debilitated and sick and miserable and in constant pain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not living. So, it's understandable why people can become sadly, very sadly, suicidal or just give up fighting. You can understand it. And this is why, again, we did the broadcast this evening to try to pull people's coattails and say, wait a minute, before you believe the hype, we're not saying don't believe it, but we're saying before you believe it, consider this. Consider some other ideas and some other information about it before you run down that road to go sign up to get vaccinated or take a leap of let me go get 2 flu shots and I'll be doubly covered. Before you do any of that stuff, consider different perspectives and other information. This is, wait a minute, not so fast. What about this? And that's what we're doing tonight. We're having a conversation. And what we really did was let you guys eavesdrop on it, because we had so much, I don't know if you want to say fun, but it's just an interesting conversation talking about this just between ourselves. And we said, we need to share this with other people. We can't keep this information to ourselves. One of the things that the Bible talks about are men that withhold the truth in unrighteousness. And we don't ever want to do that. We don't want to be afraid to speak truth. And we don't want to be where we have information and don't share it, either out of fear or how it's going to be received. Because that's the other thing. When you step in front of people or the microphone or wherever to share your information and ideas, there's always a little trepidation. Am I going to be attacked for it? But when you want to help people, you have to put that to the side and say, I don't care. I want to help people. If it's received, it's received. And if it's not, then so be it. Well, I looked in the chat and I didn't see, believe it or not, sister. Okay, I do see one question. I didn't see any until just now. My eyes fell on one.
But anybody that has them, this is, try to present them now. You can do.
Yeah, I did already ask them to get them ready. Brother Ben has a question. Anyone else, please, all caps if you can. Brother Ben's question, he says, sorry if you already answered. I missed it. Any theories about the medication that supposedly treats HIV AIDS? How does it destroy the immune system? I do believe that Sister Angel covered that, but Sister Angel, if you'd like to address that again quickly.
Well, it's a DNA chain terminator, and essentially it was designed to kill cancer cells. Now, because it was a chemo drug, so think about what a chemo drug does. You know how much havoc it wreaks on the body, but for a short time. Right, so it's only supposed to be administered for a really short time, and they know it's going to kill cells. They know it's going to kill healthy tissue, not make you sick. But the hope is it'll kill the cancer cells also, because it's indiscriminate and it's killing everything. Well, what they've done is they've taken a chemo drug that was deemed, but from the tests that they did on animals, way too deadly to even use it in that limited capacity for like people that are on their deathbeds with cancer. Just for a short time. It was deemed too deadly for that purpose, so it was never actually used in humans. And then they trotted it out for HIV. And the reason I guess supposedly, there's a lot of layers to this, because you're wondering who thought they were telling the truth. I mean, the clinical trials were just a complete mess. They were they violated all these controls and all this stuff. If you look into it, it was just a mess. But the thought was that because the viruses are so small, and in theory, because it's hard to even detect them consistently in a so-called HIV patient, They needed something really, really strong to throw at this virus that they were claiming was doing so much damage while being so scarce in the blood. So they needed a really strong chemo drug. Essentially, it basically does the same thing chemo does, but instead of killing rather large cancer cells in a limited time, where you administer it just as little as you can for as short a period of time as you can to try to reduce the amount of damage it does. They've basically attenuated these chemo drugs. There's a whole bunch of different kinds now. They've diluted them a bit so that they obviously the people won't drop dead after a month on them as they did in the beginning, which of course they attributed to just the AIDS, right? Because even though the side effects from these meds are known to be identical and indiscernible from AIDS, if an AIDS patient dies while on these medications, it's AIDS. Because everything is there's a huge umbrella term for AIDS. Tuberculosis, all these things that were once considered their own viruses or their own diseases. Now, if you're HIV negative on this test, you just have tuberculosis. But if you're positive, you have you're HIV positive, you have AIDS, and it's the reason for your tuberculosis. That's the insanity of all of them. Because all of these things that are considered AIDS-defining, which aren't consistent across all countries and population groups anyway, were all their own thing in the past and known to affect people maybe with weakened immune systems, whatever, but even just regular people. But now, as long as you have that stupid positive result, which isn't even consistent depending on where you get the test done, you are, it's just blamed on AIDS. It's very, very convenient. You really can't go wrong. You can't falsify it, you can't nullify it, because it just kind of, it doesn't exist within the bounds of, like the laws of physics or virology especially. But yeah, those drugs are just chemo drugs. They do what chemo drugs do. They destroy.
Wow. Now, there's a gentleman, let me see if I can recall his name. He used to do a broadcast years ago called Radio Liberty, and he passed away. He was in his 80s. I'm sorry, his name is escaping me right now. But he used to talk about how chemotherapy was mustard gas that was left over from World War II.
Maybe a form of it, yeah.
A form of it, yeah. And that they found a way to use it. What's puzzling though, whenever you see anyone who's being treated for cancer, they are hoping that the theory is based on this. If you study it all out, the theory is that the drugs that they give you, they're hoping will kill the cancer before the drugs kill you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then we apply it to an HIV person, a positive person that's given it to it lifelong. It doesn't hold because you have to be on it your whole life. So it will kill you. It will kill you. The medicines will kill you. Imagine chemo all your life.
Wow.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, they've weakened they dilute it. They dilute it because it's potent at first, but it's still slowly killing you the same way chemo would.
I recall the brother's name, Stan Monteith. That was his name.
Okay. There's also Gary Null is a really good one. Gary Null, Null. He does a lot of really great work on this.
Yes, I'm familiar with a lot of the work he does, trying to caution people, warn people, look deep before you leap is what we're saying. Before you get in agreement with something and sign your life away and agree to put stuff in your body that they're not going to even tell you what it really does to the body, ask for the product insert. They don't like it. You will see them get an attitude when you ask them, okay, doctor, you want me to take this drug? Let me look at the product insert. I'd like to refer to it and read what it will do and what the known side effects are, which I argue are not side effects. They're direct effects, because if you weren't taking it, they wouldn't happen. But they call it a side effect, which is my never to be humble opinion, a Jedi mind trick to make you disassociate that if I weren't taking the drug, I wouldn't be having these effects. So, okay, we'll call it side effects because that's what they call it. And then you start reading that. I did this. I'm not telling you to do something I didn't do. I looked at the product insert. You should have seen the attitude the doctor got with me for asking for the product insert. And then they had to run around trying to find it. They find it. They give it to me. And I'm like, okay, you want to inject this stuff next to my spine. Okay, because they were claiming it was a medicine that was going to help me prevent blood clots, yet it could have caused paralysis. And I said, I'll take my chance with the blood clot. Thank you very much. I'm not going to risk putting something in my system that has been known to cause permanent paralysis. Go ahead.
Well, and see, that I almost forgot. So it's not just the HIV test. People put way too much faith in all of these laboratory tests. I beg you, if there's any time where you get diagnosed with something entirely on the basis of a test, without actually having illness or symptoms yet, please don't believe that diagnosis just on that test, especially if you don't investigate that test rigorously. Because, for instance, gestational diabetes, this is supposed to be like a plague with pregnant women in America. And it has nothing to do with like your previous risk, your family history, whether they're, you have diabetics in your family. It's just some special magical thing that happens when you're pregnant. And typically you find out that you have it before you have any symptoms, because they do this test routinely. They test you for gestational diabetes. Now, what they do is they make you drink this awful sugary thing. And then within like 30 to 50 minutes, they take your blood and they test your blood sugar, right? Now, I've heard of easier ways of testing your blood sugar, like the way they do it all the time at home with a finger stick, after, a certain time before after meals. Well, so what happened to me when I was pregnant with my second child, they had a really hard time getting, I'm very hard to get to get blood out of or to do an IV. It's very hard to stick me. And I eventually had to go to the hospital because they couldn't do it in the doctor's office. So I went to the hospital to get it done, and I took the drink, and they gave me conflicting information about when I could eat before the test. So I basically, the lab clerk at the desk, she told me I could go eat, such and such amount of time before this test. And she didn't tell me what I could eat or what I couldn't eat. So I got McDonald's and I got a McMuffin or whatever and Coke, and took the test a couple hours later. Well, I tested as being, my blood sugar was too high according to this test, right? Mm-hmm. And they were going to, but I didn't have any symptoms, so they were going to retest me. But I got very, very sick after this test. Very sick. Like I was dizzy and just, I don't know what it was. After 3 days, they took a lot of blood out of me, and I don't know why, but it was just an awful experience when I did that test. And I didn't want to go through the next test was even worse. It was an even more intensive test where I had to drink more, and it would take longer. And so I asked them, well, I started looking into the test. First of all, I started looking into this idea of gestational diabetes and how they identify it with this test. And I found out that I think it was in the 70s, when they're basing their interpretation of what's too high, like what your blood sugar should be as a pregnant woman, on data that was gathered that's just totally improperly, it was just a mess.
Compiled,
because basically it wasn't controlled for your ethnicity. They didn't actually know whether it should be a certain level at a given stage in your pregnancy, and it was like a very small sample size. But upon that data, they were basing their, this diagnosis of gestational diabetes for all pregnant women across all periods in their pregnancy, all ages and ethnicities. And so that was dodgy. But then also you're doing it in an unnatural setting where you're drinking this very, very sugary drink. You're sitting usually in like in my case, in a very cold hospital waiting room for a long time, not moving, just waiting until the test is done. And it's just, to me, it just seemed like an unnatural way to actually assess anything about how my body works. So I asked them if there's any other way, because also it's very hard to get blood out of me, and they already took a bunch out, and I didn't think it was going to happen again miraculously, that they would, be able to test me and get a vein. And so they said, oh yeah, well, you could just monitor your own blood sugar at home for about 10 days, like a diabetic would, and write down the results. I was like, oh my, and lo and behold, of course, I didn't have gestational diabetes. Mm-hmm. And that, and combined with the way that the test was so dubious, made me realize it was not just the HIV test. I mean, you don't know with any of these tests, most people don't look into it on how the test is designed or what they're basing their diagnosis on. And so many diseases in America are totally based on a diagnosis from a lab test, and we just go with it blindly. We assume that the test is, like an oracle or something, and it can't be wrong. But
That's right.
No other symptoms. If you don't have any other symptoms or anything you can observe, that tells you you do in fact have a problem or a disease, I please don't let a test tell you that you have or don't have something.
It's funny that you should mention that, because I have a friend that had contacted me to ask me a few questions about a matter and a health concern. And the doctor was trying to tell her that she had this really gross problem with her heart. And but yet he's saying he can't help her. He basically like made this pronouncement and then essentially sent her home to die. Yep. And I said, well, sister, how do you feel? She said, I feel amazing. I feel wonderful. I don't feel like well, I said, well, then go with that. Do the things that you know are helpful for you to do. Listen to your body. Do the things that we had discussed for her to do, that I had referred her to some books to get some deeper insight regarding her heart, people who are much more learned and expert than me, and pointed her in the right direction. And I said, then listen to your body. And this is the one thing I think that we have forgotten to do, that they kind of beaten us out of, is to listen to our body. If you eat something and it causes you to regurgitate, maybe you shouldn't be eating that anymore. If you drink something and it makes you feel other than yourself, maybe you shouldn't be drinking that anymore. If you eat something and your body feels wondrous and amazing and awesome and there's no letdown, maybe that's the way you're supposed to be eating. So listen to your body. No two people are the same. We might have similarities, but we're not the same. There's things that won't work for you that wouldn't work for me necessarily, and vice versa, and on and on. So listen to your body and do what's right for you. It's okay to get as much information and then experiment and start low and slow. Try something, decide for yourself. No, that doesn't work. And then go on. Don't think, you'll be surprised how many people that I listen to concerning health things that 15 years ago I wouldn't have listened to, because they weren't believers. Now be cognizant, pay attention to separate what someone's telling you from, let's say, spiritual things, okay, necessarily. But they may have some really good health information, and then that's where you leave it. Or somebody else has some very good understanding on this, and that's where you leave it. And then measure all things according to the Holy Spirit that dwells inside of you, the word of the living God. And if none of that's sending up a red flag, proceed even then with caution. But beloved, prayerful, always cognizant that we live in a world that is a web of lies, wrapped around lies, steeped in lies, smeared with lies, sprayed with lies, and then they hand it to you and tell you it's the truth. So we have
lies that are stacked on each other, where there's so many lies that the doctors don't even have to know. They don't have to be complicit in any of this, because the empirical science, the health institution of that, it's just assumption on assumption on assumption on assumption. They don't start from scratch to prove anything. They start from they get on top of a mountain of assumptions from the past of other people that have all been, it's agreed upon, this is true. And they go from there. But they don't start from scratch to prove what they're telling you. And if you look into this HIV thing and you realize the fundamental, easy to understand, basic immunological principles that doctors every day, when they comply with this lie and this myth, even research scientists, that they go along with, and don't even stop to question, even though it flies in the face of all kinds of basic things they were taught while they were in college. That makes you realize, they're not that smart. It's not like they're all geniuses. And there's a high degree of conformity within the medical profession. They've even done studies on this. And the peer review system is actually, a lot of people think that that's like us, that's our fail safe against, lies and bad information. It's the opposite. The peer review system is actually a genius, I believe, a little creation of Satan, to where he gets people that are educated to go along with so many of these lies without actually having a high degree of conscious complicity. Because the peer review system is really just about bias. It's about appeals to authority and consensus and conformity. And they don't even have an agreed upon definition of what is peer reviewed. But it's basically like all the popular kids agree that something
go along cool. to get along. Yeah, and if you don't go along, you're alienated and shunned and ridiculed and exactly.
Right. I mean, even Terry Mullis, the Nobel laureate, he should be trusted. Especially him and Duesberg are two of the top experts, and because they went against consensus, even though they presented some questions that are just, fundamental, like about, the fact that Carrie Mullis couldn't even find a way to cite. See, that's how he discovered that HIV was a hoax. He was trying to write a paper because he got a grant. He was going to try to develop a diagnostic tool for HIV, something. And he started out the paper with HIV is the probable cause of AIDS, and he wanted to cite it. And he went months trying to find the study that proved that. This was like in the early mid 90s, trying to find the study that proved that, and he couldn't find anything. And then he finally went to one of the, I think it was Luc Montagnier, one of the co-discoverers, who has since also said that he doesn't believe that HIV alone is the cause of AIDS. He at the very least, needs cofactors. He claims he's another Nobel Prize winner. And so he asked him. He thought if anybody would know, this guy, Luc Montagnier, who's considered one of the co-discoverers of the HIV virus, he's going to know. And he asked him, and he cited a study that didn't at all prove HIV caused AIDS. It was it was something about monkeys that had never even been. It was a really bad study. And when he realized that there was nothing that proved it at all, that was when he started to question. But keep in mind, like most everybody else, even after they heard these arguments, they, from Duisberg, from Carrie Mullis, Nobel Prize winners. What kind of Nobel Prizes your doctor won?
Right.
But because Carrie Mullis is now not one of the popular kids, because he's gone against the grain by asking basic questions that were never answered in the beginning, he's not listened to. He's considered an AIDS denialist. It's
right.
Absolutely ridiculous. And these are the people we trust every day with some of the most crucial decisions. And they are not brilliant. They're not smarter than you by nature, by default.
Well, I've noticed that doctors do try to do that. They'll try to intimidate you like, well, I went to medical school, therefore I know. Okay, but I can still. Okay, fine. You went to medical school. Then let me ask you some questions that you ought to be able to answer.
Exactly.
And when they can't answer you, thank you very much for your opinion, because that's what you're getting is a medical opinion. And you go do further research.
Yep. I mean, I've asked whenever they're trying to pressure me about vaccinations for my kids. I have a flow chart I drew up by hand, proving, and it's not just about aluminum or anything. It's a flow chart so that they can totally see what I'm saying, because it's kind of complicated. Basically, when you make a vaccine, you have to culture the active ingredients in a bunch of things like chicken egg and shark squalene and all this stuff, these biological materials they use to culture the virus, the active ingredients. And then, they do some level of purification after they culture it. But the thing is the viruses are so much smaller than all of the debris and particulates and the culture media that's left over, that they can't isolate the active ingredient from the vaccine. So they have to allow this debris, this stuff that's left over from culturing it, which are things like chicken egg and shark squalene, which are almost identical in terms of your the immune system in your bloodstream, which is not very discerning, because like I said, it is not your first line of defense. Your mucous membranes are discerning. Your bloodstream was never supposed to have to tell the difference between your squalene, which is like your joint lubricant, and a shark squalene. It just looks very similar. It's probably like 98% similar on a molecular level. It just squalene. And so because that can't be filtered out of the vaccine, because the virus is so much smaller, and there's just they're almost like a ghost. They're smaller than almost anything. There's just no way to create a pure vaccine. You are getting immunized or inoculated with stuff that's identical to your own tissues. And then they also inject an adjuvant, which is like the aluminum, right? So that helps ensure an immune response by stirring your body up, irritating your immune system. And so when anything that's injected into you at that point with that adjuvant is going to be identified as an invader, an attacker. But problem is, it looks just like your own tissues. So it's amazing, because some of the things they culture these things in are things like squalene, right? Where we have suddenly all this rheumatoid arthritis, these joint problems, autoimmune disorders in the past 100 years. And every single one of them, if you look into it, you can actually make a parallel between one of the things that they commonly culture vaccine with. Things like and even like infertility with if the chicken egg, that those cells are very similar to your own. Like, if you think about basically your bloodstream can't discern the difference between like an animal byproduct used to make the vaccine and your own tissues, then it makes so much sense where all this autoimmunity comes from. And it also tells you that it was like misdirection when they started talking about aluminum in the vaccines, because it goes much deeper than that on a fundamental level, unless they can make a pure vaccine where it's only active ingredient or something that you'll never in any other situation, like you can't develop an autoimmunity to it. Because all these allergies are another problem. The allergies for things that aren't in your body, but things you eat or are exposed to, those are also related to culture media that's in the vaccine still. Now, I've asked doctors, pediatricians who inject kids every day, how they can explain this away for me, because, I still love the theory of a vaccine. I think it's brilliant. I think like, wow, it should work, right?
If it worked, right?
But so I want somebody to prove me wrong. But when I've asked, pediatricians, it's like, it just doesn't work that way. And I know they've never even thought about it. I could tell, like, in their face, they have no answer, and they've never even thought about it, and they can't explain to me, despite the fact that I've displayed a more than average level of understanding of these things. They can't even explain it to me in technical terms, much less layman's terms. They can't explain why my theory or my question's bogus. And that happens all the time when you present them with these things, because they can't tell you that they can't even accept that some of these things are false, that are lies, that they've been complicit in, because it makes them murderers. In a lot of ways, or it makes them very complicit in a lot of a crime against humanity.
As soon as that thought hits their mind, they have to dismiss it, because then they realize they were complicit. Even though that wasn't their intention, it's like when you realize you've done harm and that wasn't your intention, then you've got to run away from the knowledge that that you did that, because
there's no way
it indicts you. There's no way out. You either have to own it and say, look, I didn't know any better, and I did it in ignorance, and this is in my own way a way of making amends to humanity for what I did in ignorance, versus just pretending that you did no harm.
Well, because they can't, they know that how hard the road is if they decide that it's true, that vaccines are harmful. They know that their career's over, as far as they, at least the career they've known, because they're not going to have some big pediatric practice without vaccinating. They don't have the, a lot of them don't really want to force you to vaccinate your kids if you don't want to, but they don't even have the choice anymore, because of it, even if it's not mandated locally, like insurance and all this stuff. That they don't have, and so they have to decide to give up their career and their lifestyle,
right,
for the truth, or just remain in denial.
They literally have put them under the barrel of a medical gun, to where if you don't comply, if you don't bend to what we say is the norm and the only thing that should happen, you lose your career, you lose your credentials, you lose everything.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's very hard for me to find a pediatrician, because I have one right now, but it always ends once my kids are a few months old, because they might allow me, some won't even allow me not to vaccinate my newborn, even though my first child had a vaccine reaction to the DTaP. No, she didn't get permanently injured, but she got very, very ill. And my original pediatrician said I did not have to vaccinate her anymore. Bless her heart. I mean, she's the only one who's ever said anything like that, but I moved. And even though I have that, and my pediatrician would confirm it if they ever asked, here, I have only found one pediatrician that will take me on any long-term basis. And even this one that I have right now, the last time I was there, she said at the next checkup, we're going to have to start talking about vaccines. And so I don't know if she just hasn't talked to the other pediatrician, the original one who took me on knowing I was the anti-vaxxer, or if that's like the ultimatum where, they'll only take me while she's a brand newborn. And then after that, it's done. But so if my kids get sick, I'd have to take them to the ER, which is another reason I say colloidal silver, please, everybody try it, because I'm in a position where my kids can't get sick all the time. I can't be dealing with kids being sick all the time, because I don't have a pediatrician most of the time. And colloidal silver has been amazing. Like no ear infection so far with my kids.
Right.
I did get a case where my littlest got RSV We had to go to the hospital, but I wasn't using the silver on her. So because it does, you can make them throw up, and she was so little. So yeah, there's always ways around a lot of this stuff. But I will say Western medicine is great when it comes to like mechanical issues, like, fixing injuries and, different surgeries and stuff. But when it comes to actually healing disease, you're taking your life in your hands with I think with most doctors.
Yes, that is true. We didn't get to touch on how this switch got flipped in the medical profession and went from what we would know as naturopathy or doing natural remedies like your grandmother used to do when she used to tell you, go make yourself some hot onion soup or chicken soup for that cold, or garlic, and put some heat in there and sweat it out, and all these different things that we used to know and understand, and our grandparents just knew instinctively to do that. You'd be up and around in no time flat. To now we just run and take this over-the-counter stuff that is loaded with stuff that will damage your liver and your kidneys and God only knows what else. And don't believe me, read the product insert. So when you start seeing this stuff, you start scratching your head and say, how do we go from there to here? Well, there was a switch that got flipped around the turn of the century, the 19th century, where we went from natural medicine to allopathic medicine, and how we got here. That's a long story. We might have to do a broadcast on that one evening and address that, how that switch got flipped. But beloved,
the interesting thing is homeopathy was one of the only successful treatments for the Spanish flu. People
okay.
Look at it as
I think I'm about ready to label Sister Angel like the walking, talking encyclopedia of medicine here in just a minute. Because every time I think we're close, she mentioned something else that's absolutely fascinating.
This is just something that, like, I know it's so hard to cover every angle of it, but I want people to understand I covered every angle of this and tried to find any weakness in it, because first of all, because it was so deeply affecting to me personally with my mother and my best friend, but also because I have children and I was having to confront whether or not to vaccinate them or any of it, how to treat my family. And I really, so far, there are things I don't know. Like I'm it's up in the air for me about germ theory. I do wonder sometimes if it's biblical to think that germs are what cause disease. Right. But I would never, ever come on here and try to tell you guys that definitively, because it's something that I see plenty of arguments in favor of germ theory. I mean, my daughter was just in the hospital from an alleged virus that she tested positive for, and she was having a hard time breathing. And we were exposed to that virus when she was born, because there was an outbreak of it on the peds ward. And so we were kept there for a couple of days. So, it tracks, right? But I'm just saying a lot of this stuff is empirical science. It's founded on a mountain of assumptions that people haven't gone back to prove in 100 years, because
like a house of cards.
Exactly.
And didn't the gentleman that invented or I shouldn't say invented, but came up with the germ theory, didn't he recant that, like on his deathbed or something?
He said that the disease or the microbe is nothing. The arena,
the terrain is everything.
Yeah, and which is very a little bit coded to me. I still try to figure out how to apply that, practically, like what he was saying. The terrain would be the body, right? I was
right, yeah.
I mean, we are told
like
that
the atmosphere, yeah.
Well, I mean, you pointed out, the Bible says it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you.
Yeah, Jesus said it. He's God. Yeah. This is what it's saying. So God is saying, don't be worried about what's on the outside. Worry about what's coming out.
Right.
From the inside.
When did God, see, this is something too.
I heard Dr. Bergman often states, excuse me, so I'm sorry, Sister Angel, because you were breaking up there. Dr. Bergman, I've heard him state numerous times that you don't catch a cold, you earn it. Meaning you've done the things necessary to get the cold by eating a lot of sugar and being stressed and not getting enough sleep.
And outside in the wet or the cold. That's happened to me repeatedly and my kids. We weren't exposed to anybody sick. I have seen this over and over again now. but I let them play outside and like on a damp, cold day, or they got really wet hands, or I was out working with my chicken coop, in a rainstorm in the winter because something needed to be done. Then I get a cold. And supposedly that's because like in your nose, basically the blood vessels constrict when you're cold, and then that inhibits your immune system from things you would otherwise be exposed to but fight off. But I don't know, that's how they explain it. But to me, it's just interesting how it's like, I used to laugh at the idea that you catch a cold from going outside with wet hair and on a chilly day or something. So that has nothing to do, what does that have to do with whether or not you're exposed to a pathogen? But I have seen it repeatedly. That's the only way we've caught colds in the past couple of years is from that. We're rarely around anybody. We live out in the country, and I homeschool, so we don't get sick very often. But that has gotten my kids sick more than once. And it is like people, I've heard recently with this whole SARS thing going around, different YouTube doctors saying like, oh, well, it's ridiculous to think that, if you're deficient in vitamin C, maybe it would help to take it to fight off a virus. But if you have enough of it, taking more won't help, because they just assume that vitamin C only has one purpose. It's you just need to have this much of it in your system, and it just does, to work, like having enough oil, as if it doesn't also fight pathogens, as if taking extra amount of it wouldn't like they just assume these things, but they're not even taught about nutrition in medical school. It's very like.
That's so true. That is so true. And do you know that they did a report? It was on the news. I think it was CBC broadcasting. I'm not 100%, but they did a report where they talked about the coronavirus in China. They were going to test intravenous vitamin C, but I suspected they were going to do just like they do in America. I haven't searched that out yet, so take this with a big fat grain of salt, that they were only going to give it like low doses, because they said we're going to start low, we're going to start small, but I don't know if they're ever going to take it high enough for it to actually have an effect, which is one of the tricks.
It is working. I have heard, but I don't know if it's that particular study, but I have heard on Israeli News Live, they said that it has, that they have, there's people that are administering it high dose vitamin C, and it's working.
Okay, good news to hear. I hope so. I hope everybody is healed from this plague that they have probably just pulled out of some jar somewhere and stuck somewhere.
Well, one thing people need to know is that toxins and poisons, they also cause flu-like symptoms and fever. I think a lot of people don't, and I'm not saying that that's what this is, but that's a major key to understand when it comes to any of this stuff. Well, because like polio, for example, there's a lot of evidence that it was actually related to a pesticide that was being used. I feel it's DDT, something like that. It's crazy the amount of evidence there is for that. But people would say, oh, what do you mean? But no, because you get a fever and you get like all these symptoms, and that's only from getting an infection. No, you get a fever, and flu-like symptoms, body aches, chills, all that stuff from exposure to certain toxins. There's things like chemical conjunctivitis. All these things can be, the only thing I don't know of is a way to explain contagion with, contaminants and toxins. I don't know of it. But all these other things that we would consider symptoms that have to be an infectious agent can be produced by toxins. So I find that very interesting. And that's something that even I didn't know until recently, that you could get a fever from poison, for instance.
Oh, yeah. The body is recognizing it as a foreign invader, and it just reacts as, it's funny that you say that, because they used to have a movie from back in the day that was called, let's see if I can remember. My mother's always talking about this. The name escapes me. I'll remember it in a minute. Where the subject matter was people got microsized, and I think it was Journey to something. I can't remember, but they microsized these people and stuck them like people talk about nanotechnology or whatever. They stuck them in the human body, and the body recognized them as invaders and tried to attack them with the white blood cells and stuff like that. Well, they showed it. This was back in the 60s. They knew this stuff. So, I mean, why would it stand to reason that anything that's foreign, that's injected into the bloodstream, that the body would treat it any different?
And attack it and try to destroy it. Because what they do, a lot of your immune cells, they'll swallow up these invaders or toxins or whatever to get them, expelled as waste products. Or they'll try to destroy them like physically, basically, by digesting them, right? And so it wouldn't just apply to what we'd consider an organic microorganism, but even inorganic substances. I mean, it would work across the board. I have heard. Here's one thing I want to point out about this whole SARS. I like to call it SARS-2. This time it's personal. And they say that somehow you're during the incubation period. This is one of the most scary things about it, and one of the most hopeless things about it in terms of how people contain it or even avoid getting it, or know you have it, because they say that you can catch it and be incubating it, which is all that is like what you think of an incubator. You're growing it. It's replicating in your system. That you're replicating the virus, but you're not going to test positive for it necessarily during the incubation period. But somehow you're also shedding the virus enough to infect lots of people. They're telling us that, if you think about that for a second, this is what I always want people to do, just think about what they're saying, and don't be intimidated because it sounds like, this isn't my area of expertise. Just think about it logically. If there's not enough virus for it to even test positive, if they're looking for it, how can there be enough virus to where it can afford to shed itself and go and infect other people, where there's just that much of it, where you're infecting people, or, even when they say, like I said with HIV, you're testing negative for it, yet it's somehow causing this killer illness, but there's not even enough of it to actually register on a test, which already is, test looking for like the most minute amount, of a substance in your body, right? That doesn't make sense, but they tell us that, a lot of the stuff that they'll tell us about a virus, or, especially viruses are like a very weird thing. If bacteria is definitely real, I'm still not sure about viruses. Viruses violate a lot of, other principles. They're not quite alive, not quite dead. They just want to reproduce. They just have a little bit of, genetic material. They seem like a machine. They seem like what they tell us they want to develop with nanobots. That's what a virus seems like. And they even depict them that way. When they draw them, tell us what they look like. They look like these little spider machines, and stuff like that. And they operate like a machine. But the thing is that they'll pretty much let these viruses violate any like tenet of epidemiology, necessary to explain what they're what's actually presenting. So supposedly people are getting infected with this virus. And they have to explain it despite, not having a lot of positive tests or symptomatic people. So they say, it must be infecting people during the incubation period when people are testing negative. But now they're saying it's up to 40 days that you could test, negative, or just be incubating it and not having symptoms. But always be suspicious when there's an inconsistency in how something presents. So if it's they say in 80% of the people it's mild, they don't even know they have it. And then in 20% of the people it's critical, and they have to be, hospitalized, right? And, in Wuhan and in China, supposedly the mortality rate is something like, I've seen 2%. We're not getting the real information from China, but let's just say the mortality rate is like 4%. And, it kills by giving you pneumonia. Well, in Iran, suddenly and inexplicably, there's this huge outbreak. But it is killing people at a much faster rate, and it's causing viral myocarditis, which is where the virus infects your heart muscle. And and that's totally, and I haven't heard any of that happen so far. China hadn't put that forth, and that would be weird because they have a much bigger sample size supposedly. And I find it very convenient that Iran, of all places, which seems like we and our allies can't seem to leave alone for a second, suddenly, even though you wouldn't really think of Iran too much in terms of having tons of Chinese people, right? Well, even in rural areas of Iran, there's like this huge outbreak, and I've seen people commenting from Iran saying, I can't believe the numbers you guys are getting in the West. Here on our news, they're saying that there's 650 people dead, and I don't know what's really killing people. I do suspect people are dying, though. I don't go along with this idea that it's all a hoax, that no one's dying. I think people are really dying, but I'm just saying,
one of the problems is when you have all of this chaos happening, there's things that can start happening in the midst of that chaos that can be attributed as deaths that had nothing to do with the other chaos. This happened during Hurricane Katrina. This is why I mentioned that, and what happened to Black folk down there in Louisiana. And there were a bunch of mysterious deaths to Black males that has never been investigated. So, I don't even want to go down that road. That would be a topic for a different day. But when there's all this chaos going on, if for example, God forbid, if a fire were to break out in a mall, the commotion that brings, this is what people do with misdirection. It creates this enormous distraction. Everybody's running, fleeing, but the people who are focused on what their intent is and what their mission is, anything. They could do anything. They could rob the place. They could do other stuff, whatever they're doing, because everyone's distracted by the commotion and the hysteria that's been created from that.
Right. And, when it comes to like this whole thing, I'm seeing people actually on YouTube in like conspiracy circles and like liberty circles, criticizing the WHO and the CDC for not declaring medical martial law. They're mad that they're not being draconian enough. Like all these people that would have always, we don't want martial law. They're coming for us, Alex Jones types. Now suddenly they're mad that the WHO and the CDC aren't apparently jumping at the chance to do this, to declare a pandemic, at which point that a bunch of stuff would kick in that, would, enable the US and the other affiliate country to declare martial law or even require it. And I just, I think that's really funny how all these other people, these people that would normally say that's like our biggest enemy, they're begging for a forced quarantine, and it's like, the logistics of a quarantine are terrible because if you think they're going to suspend your mortgage payment, you think they're going to make sure you have enough money to buy groceries, you think they're going to, there's so many things that,
who's going to keep track of who's who and where they went?
Right. Yeah, it would require, if it was forced, it would require basically martial law to actually be enforced. And that's terrifying. And I would rather take my chances with this nebulous virus, which seems to be deadlier, inexplicably based on where it breaks out, even within the same country. China, I estimated just from what, at least according to people that claim to be, crematory workers and stuff in different legal calls, I estimated that it would have to be around 84,000 people that died because of the amount of crematories and the amount of time they were working, around the clock, and the fact that it only takes 50 minutes to cremate a body. It was like 84,000. I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that based on that information, that would be the only explanation. It's very convenient though that we have Iran and China, two places that are, kind of, considered dictatorial. I'm not sure about Iran, but there's a limited amount of information coming out. Iran is pretty skeptical and guarded because of, getting it from every direction, people trying to basically destabilize them and overthrow them. So they don't want to share a lot of information, but it's also a really good place to have something like this happen if it's a weapon, if it's not really a virus, because the information is limited and controlled as it is. So it would be really easy to keep the narrative controlled in those areas, in China, in Iran. But I so far at least, I feel like God has, especially even with our congregation, I haven't seen a whole lot of people panicking. I haven't noticed a whole lot of believers really panicking about this. I've seen a lot of unbelievers panicking about it, but it almost seems like the Holy Spirit's keeping certain people calm and stirring other people up. I was very stirred up about China, though, in terms of my compassion and it hurts me to see what the Chinese are going through. Whatever is causing it, it really hurts me because they just need the Lord so badly, and there's so many Christians now. So,
Amen. Let's everyone keep them in our prayers, beloved. Yeah. All the people. We're not saying that people aren't being harmed. We're not saying that people aren't being destroyed, devastated, killed, etc., dying because of this. It's not what we're saying at all. We're just saying examine the context, examine the facts, get information for yourself, learn, be informed, don't make rash decisions, and certainly never make any decisions in fear.
Right. And when it comes to a virus being blamed for anything, look into just how hard it is to isolate a virus. Look into just how hard it is to even study them, as small as they allegedly are, and really factor that in before you base any of your assumptions on the idea of like a virus being the cause of it, because sometimes we really are shadow boxing. because they're very hard to detect. They're very hard to study. They're according to what we're told, they're extremely small and they're not well understood. And a lot of scientists have pointed out that what was identified as a virus was really a white blood cell. In different, even including one of the documentaries I think we're going to list tonight, they will point out how what was supposedly identified as HIV was actually a white blood cell, because they change their shape based on what they're doing at the moment. And microscopy is it's kind of like, what we're told when it comes to what they say is out there in space, and I know hundreds of millions of light years away, there's another Earth or whatever, and we can't verify that. Right, all this stuff. So when you look at like anything that requires an electron microscope, and not only that, but then you have to, even if you had one, you would look through it, and if you could even focus on something, you wouldn't know what you were looking at, and it would be very, very hard for you yourself to prove what that thing was or what it did. And you would have to base your conclusions on previous assumptions, supposedly proven empirically by other laboratory scientists. And that's how this is done. That's how they perpetrate so many of these lies, is because people that are studying this stuff, they are not starting from scratch and lying all over again. They are basing their assumptions off of lies that they have believed. And only, I believe, Satan could come up with all this, because it's very intricate and there's a lot of moving parts. And I don't think the human mind could conceive of it, but the human mind can believe, buy into it. And then plenty of these people that we've even discussed tonight are knowingly complicit. Like Anthony Fauci, I truly believe that. And so, that's,
no doubt. We don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes. We know the Lord. See, this is what I love about it, though. We don't have to know all the answers. We know someone who does. And sometimes just consulting the Lord, he may not say do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but he'll say, no, don't do that. Don't go there. You don't need that. And that pause that will cause you to look deep before you leap and protect you. That's why we say seek the Lord first before you do anything, and then examine the context. What's wrong with taking a deep breath and looking around and paying attention to what's going on? And this is what I keep trying to tell people. I understand, yes, there are people being affected by this, and we're going to keep those people in our prayers. But when you walk outside of your front door and you look left and everything's okay, and you look right and everything's okay, you still have to maintain, live your life, raise your family, go to work, pay your bills, do the things that you have to do. You can't allow yourself to get stressed and bogged down by this hype, this hysteria that can be created by people in the media. And I'm telling you, sometimes if you would just diagram what they're saying, listen to the words they're saying, it's almost laughable, because they'll sit up and say things like, we're not sure, we assume, we presume, all of it, and it's speculative. So you're like, well, okay, if it's speculative, then what's all the hype about?
Right, and now they're clever enough that what they've done, in my opinion, is they've had the mainstream media, and even like the mainstream organizations like CDC and WHO, they've had them so-called downplay this, and then what they do is they have the alternative media like panic, play it up like big time, like it's the end of the world, it's the Spanish flu all over again, Black Plague. That's what, if you look at the alternative media, they'll tell you that the mainstream media is covering this up, they're downplaying it, who's covering this up, and it's the thing is I really think people need to understand, they know that nobody trusts the mainstream media anymore. They're not going to tell you what they want you to believe in the mainstream media. They might even tell you the truth in the mainstream media, and then have the alternative media contradict that and tell you a total lie, because they know you're not going to listen to the mainstream anymore, but you're gonna believe that you're going to get more truth from the alternative media. Now, if people think that they didn't see the alternative media coming, and actually preempt it and plant a bunch of liars along the way, you're just naive, because anything you see them pushing in the mainstream media, just automatically assume they want you to do the opposite of that thing. They had that base covered. If the social engineers have people thinking that they're born in the wrong body, and that it's okay to abort babies after they're born, because of depression or something, like they've marched us along the beat of this drum of insanity, of absolute insanity. I know, because I believed in a lot of this crap that they pushed down my throat as growing up, like a lot of this liberalism. They know how to manipulate you gradually, and suddenly suddenly they're not being very gradual about it anymore. Suddenly they're not being very nuanced. They're being pretty obvious. They're pretty much hitting you over a hammer, hitting you over the head with a hammer,
Right.
with things that they know most people are going to reject and be angry about and say, no way, that's crossing the line. No, transvestites in the bathroom with my kids so that their feelings don't get hurt. No way. No, they know that that's not the way to get people to go along with things.
Right.
That's not how it ever worked before. They had to just drip by drip by drip. And so now they're just flooding you. And then they have the alternative media there to rage against what the mainstream is doing. And they know that most people are really going to be arrogant enough to think that they've outsmarted them. And I'm not listening to the mainstream anymore. I got this, YouTube and all that. And they got their agents there. And they're going to push a narrative. And that's what you're going to be more likely to listen to. So just be skeptical about that. Like I said, it's always better to assume. I would think it's better to assume that this is a virus. It's contagious, and it could be very serious, because as far as I can tell, the problem is that if a lot of people suddenly get pneumonia all at once, most hospitals in your average town are not equipped to handle a glut of pneumonia patients all at once. It's just that
there'll be a lot of people victimized as a result. I don't like to use the word casualties because it's a military term, but that's what they push these certain agendas for, is the effect that it will have overwhelming people, however that plays out. Right. And as Lennon said, no, not the singer. He said, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves, y'all. So this stuff is multifaceted on the little Jedi mind tricks and demonic games they've been playing with us since time immemorial. But on that note, Sister Angel, we're going to need to wind this up. It's getting late now. But I wanted to give the final question, if he had one, to Brother Matthias, since no one else had any in the chat at the time.
Because he hadn't heard of this until we brought it up.
Did he fall asleep on us, Brother Matthias? Are you still there?
Give him a second to get back to the
No,
mic.
I just have so many screens open. I'm like, where is it? Well, not any real questions. Very informative, and yes, it is new information to me. Like I knew there was something up with it, but when I heard you guys talking about it the other night, and Paula had asked for the video link, that was my first dive into it. But common sense makes sense in this. And then also, Lisa, you were saying earlier that it's a medical opinion. And what's funny is that they actually call it practice.
That's right.
They're actually practicing on you.
That's right.
And that's one of the ways that they're able to get away with what they do, is by even calling it practice.
Right.
Oh yeah.
So
we're amening you.
Because I just realized that my mom's doctor was I'll go into that later. Yeah, I agree.
It's quite clear that the symbol of true healing, look upon Jesus and be healed. Look upon the sin on the cross and be healed. Look upon the serpent on the staff and be
single
healed.
staff.
And that is the true symbol that's been twisted.
That's right.
And used against us for so-called health. True health is, how are you spiritually? Are you going to heaven? Are you going to live forever?
That's right.
That's true health. But what we're dealing with in this day and age, see, I think we're supposed to be living to 120. I think the Bible says that.
It does.
Think that even just 100 years ago, everybody knew their great-grandparents. It wasn't uncommon for people to live past 100. And the history books, and they try to tell us now that because of modern medicine, now we get to live to 80, 70, or 80. It's like, no, modern medicine brought us down to 70 or 80. That's right. The problem. Modern medicine. And
we have a way higher infant mortality, maternal mortality rate here too in the U.S. Amazingly, than like a lot of places they consider third world.
that's another thing. They turned birth into a business.
Mm-hmm.
And but yes, listening to this, it really just goes to show that the enemy is very subtle, cunning. He's willing to wait, and he's been at it for centuries.
Yep.
And when he found out ways to kill more indiscriminately, he just goes right at it. I mean, war has been his main one. War and religious purposes has been the main one. But since these modern viruses and through the invention of modern medicine, I mean, I don't think it was talked about tonight, but Lisa, you mentioned it before, as in the majority of people who die within the medical industry are those from either malpractice or just straight up accidents or the pharmaceuticals themselves. I mean, it's the
Yes,
Just acknowledge.
iatrogenics. It's called iatrogenics. They kill close to 1 million people a year in the medical profession. When you factor in mistakes, surgeries, the drugs themselves that people die taking correctly according to the doctor's instructions, when you add up all this stuff, I'll put the link in the description. It's called iatrogenics. They cure nearly 1 million people a year. Go ahead, brother.
That doesn't factor in the ones that aren't that are like that they won't consider iatrogenics. Like, anybody like that dies from something done to them by Western medicine that's not officially ruled as like a case of iatrogenics.
For example, like when they say that the cancer is what killed the patient, not the chemo.
Yeah. And when they say you're cured you're cured of cancer if you don't die from that exact same cancer within, what is it, like 2 years,
right,
5
you're
years?
chemo survivor is what it is.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and just real quick on that, from my understanding, and I am not a medical profession, so check with your professional. But from my understanding, there are 4 types of cancer, and 3 of them will not bother you in this lifetime. Like, one of them is obsolete. Another one is, the other 2 are so slow that they'd kill you in like the next 250 years. There's only one cancer that actually can do any damage and will kill you within 3 to 6 months. Now, the thing is they're acting as if all cancers are that one that can kill you, and they can't determine which cancer you have for about 6 months of testing. So they'll know you have cancer, but they don't know of which 4 you have. 3 of them, and I haven't said it yet, but 3 of them make up 97% of most cancers, will not harm you at all. You could live with it the rest of your life and not have any problem. But what they're doing is they're trying to attack that one type of cancer that's only 3%. That they're trying to attack that and try to get ahead of that before that 6-month period where they could even tell you which type of cancer you have, because you might be dead if you have that one, if you have that 3% type. But here's the thing. If everybody who is diagnosed with cancer didn't do a darn thing about it, there would only be a 3% death rate.
My grandmother, she had breast cancer. She never let them touch it. She had a breast tumor. She never let them touch it because she said that she said if they cut it, if they even do a biopsy, she said that could spread it. She didn't.
That's right.
She died like 15 years later, at 83 from like heart failure. She had the cancer, never did anything. She didn't let them cut her. They couldn't do anything with it. Never treated it.
Exactly, because there's nothing. Because most 97% of the cancers You'll have no issue with it, no problem whatsoever. And the thing is there's an 80% death rate of chemo patients. Yep. So where's this discrepancy? If nobody did anything, only 3% of the population or 3% of the cancer patients would die. But since they're trying to do this proactive, 80% of chemo patients succumb to, well, let's just face it, chemo.
After the torture of going through it, my aunt was only 45. She had polyps, supposedly, which they said she had colorectal cancer. She wasn't sick yet, but she had a colonoscopy. They found polyps, and within 2 years, they had given her a partial. It was like she didn't want to have the full colostomy bag surgery, but so they cut out a whole bunch of her intestinal tract, and she went through chemo that made her feel like she was pooping glass. She would be on the toilet for 6 hours. This beautiful woman, beautiful blonde, like amazing. So she died after the surgery and all the chemo. She still died, where she hadn't. I mean, as far as she knew, she wasn't even sick when they found it, and all because of these polyps, which I'm sure they rely on a bunch of other laboratory tests and interpretations as to what they are and what they'll do.
Right? They say early detection is key.
Key to killing
the trick. It's like early detection means you don't even notice yet, so you got to go check, and a professional will tell you. And it's another thing that's sad, and I don't mean funny as in ha ha, but funny as in peculiar. Very few non-insured people ever come down with cancer. Amazing. I wonder why that is.
Oh, that's
wow.
Because if it doesn't get treated, there's no money in the business.
They revenue. I have, my aunt was in medical compliance. You always want to check
people who were just fine when they went to the doctor and come back and said that, because their PAPs, I think that's the right one, mammogram, that they've got breast cancer. Go through the chemo, cut off their breast, and still end up dying. And they didn't even know they were sick before they went in.
Always ask for the master charge list of what, if you get treated for anything, always ask for, they won't want to give it up, but they have to, of what they're charging your income for. And they'll go through line by line. My other aunt, she was in medical compliance for years, and she said you would be amazed at the stuff they put on there. And you could sue them a lot of money too if you find one thing on there that they didn't, wasn't actually given to you or administered, treatment you didn't have. And they do it all the time. You're a target.
That's right. Question everything, guys. Question everything. Don't assume, don't presume, don't let them assume and presume. Ask them questions. And if they try to get you to make an immediate decision on something that's not immediately life-threatening, in other words, it could wait a couple of days, by your perception, I would be fine if I wait a few days. If you decide to wait, then maybe say you want to get a second opinion, or then do your research on the matter yourself. But again, you're going to have to try to calm your heart and mind, because see, if you make a decision based on fear, you're not thinking straight. That adrenaline rush, what's going on? You can't even formulate questions at that time. You might have to say, doctor, I'll get back to you in a couple of days with some questions that I have. Let's make a phone appointment if necessary, and discuss it and write your questions down and come back to it with a clear mind. Don't let them put pressure on you if you have time to make a decision. Dr. Joel Wallach, whatever you think of him, one way or the other, I've heard him say this. There are 2 letters in the English language, and that will save your life if you learn them. And that's no.
Right.
So be prepared to say no. And if you want to, if that's what your gut is telling you, if that's what you believe the Holy Spirit is telling you, then you say, no, I want more time to examine this. If they've diagnosed you with a cancer, then take the time to go get a second opinion if you decide to, or sit down and research about it and learn about the so-called type of cancer they're claiming you have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Take that time. That's your body. You have the right to do that, and you have the right to say no.
Matthias, did you have more to say on that, about what types of cancer they are, or?
No, not really. It's just that there's a bunch of different types of cancer. I shouldn't say that, but there's four main categories.
Right.
And out of those, 3 of the 4 you can live with. Like 3 of those categories probably have 100 different cancers in it.
Right.
There's only like 2 or 3 types of cancers that will kill you at all, and only one that'll kill you within a short amount of time. But they keep giving everybody the same type of treatment as that possible one, when it's a tiny fraction of the possible chances.
Well, my grandfather, he came down with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which, by the way, my dad and my aunt are involved in that class action lawsuit because his case is textbook about Roundup. He rounded up our whole 3-acre property in the Keys right before that diagnosis. He had just bought it, and we had 3 acres on the beach, and he cleared it himself, and he used a ton of Roundup, but miraculously saved all the receipts that my aunt still has to this day after losing everything after he died, and moves upon moves. She had all the receipts about that he purchased Roundup. And so they have been involved in this class action lawsuit because he died of the exact cancer that they say is attributed to Roundup. But so there's my grandfather, then there's my aunt Robin, who died of the colorectal cancer. Both of them got the chemo and the radiation. My grandmother, who had the breast cancer, and actually my other grandmother on my mom's side also had that, but she never let them touch it either. Neither of them died of cancer. They died, a decade or more after their diagnosis from something unrelated. But the people in my family that got treated for the cancer, they died very shortly after, their diagnosis and treatment. So I could hear Luke already saying this. I can hear Luke interjecting. I am not trying to say that when you walk into a doctor's office or a hospital, that there aren't good people working for God, whether they know it or not, who are going to actually help you and actually do right by you. I do believe that's, it's up to God really in a lot of ways, especially if you're trusting him with your outcome when you place your trust in those doctors to any degree. But I just had this experience, which did humble me because I have been terrified of, literally terrified, even especially when I have my children, terrified of what's going to happen in the hospital, terrified because especially when you have kids, you don't have much say over your children. Like if they have to be hospitalized or whatever, if the hospital decides that they have to keep your child, good luck trying to get a second opinion or get them out, because they don't tell you, but you pretty much lose your custodial rights in that situation if you disagree without a second opinion from a doctor.
That's right.
But good luck getting one, because no doctor wants a pain in the butt patient who's already saying, I don't agree with this. I want, because there's a lot of liability revolving, around children too. So they don't want anybody that rocks the boat anyway. So good luck getting a second opinion. But then my daughter, my newborn, she was only a couple weeks old, got hospitalized because she came down with what seemed to be a mild cold, and then within 2 or 3 days she was laboring to breathe really bad and had to be rushed. I've told the story before, but she was in this hospital, Riley Children's Hospital, for 4 days, and they did minimal interventions. This is key, I believe. They just basically put her on the bare minimum amount of breathing assistance, which was she just needed room air with a slight amount of oxygen and some humidity, and they didn't give her any medications. They even the IV fluid they reduced to nil, just enough to keep the line open. When I said that it was making her swell up and it seemed to make her miserable, and they listened to me and they said, okay, yeah, we can turn that down because she was eating enough. And listen, the course of the illness went exactly like they told me it would. She was just needed assistance for a few days breathing until her sinuses cleared, because they can't breathe through their mouth. So if they have a stuffy nose, turns into a big problem real quick when they're newborns. And they said she'd turn a corner out of nowhere, and she would, typically this is what happens, at least they'll get sick, they'll get critical very suddenly out of nowhere, and then they'll turn a corner and be all better very suddenly out of nowhere when they're that little. And that's exactly what happened. And they did not try to force any vaccinations on me or anything like that in the hospital. And the last day I was there, a Bible verse was played over the intercom early in the morning. And they were wonderful. And those people, I feel like I owe everything to. They were wonderful to me and to my child, and they really care. And that was in Riley Children's Hospital. But so I am not slamming all doctors and nurses. I come from a family of doctors and nurses. And regardless of the lies that they're working around and even the lies that they're buying into, really what matters is how they treat, you or your child, your loved one-on-one. And the amount of education you do, like you have in terms of like what like looking into the veracity of these tests that they're relying on, or of like what's a necessary intervention and what's an unnecessary intervention, what's the prognosis for each intervention. That is critical, but they are not like I had been thinking, at least, that the worst thing that could happen would be my child have to be hospitalized with something like this, because in my mind I thought they would all just be fire-breathing dragons trying to keep her as long as possible and do as many interventions as they could and fighting me at every step. And that was not what happened. And that was because God can work through doctors and nurses, and a lot of them have their hearts in the right places, and they don't want to be do unnecessary interventions either. And a lot of them might even believe some of the stuff that we're talking about tonight, but they can't broadcast it everywhere, but they can quietly do what they can do to fight the deceptions and the lies, just by not choosing to do unnecessary things in healthy people. So I don't want people to think that this is all just downing on medical professionals, because they come in all shapes and sizes, and most of them are probably mean well, truly. Hello.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, my mic wasn't on.
Okay.
I hit the button. Goof. It was, my mic is not goof proof. That's not my fault. But thank you everyone for joining us this evening and taking the time to be with us. Thank you, Sister Angel, for making that very important point at the end. We are not against doctors. There are, in fact, if you see, we pointed to doctors and biologists, and the links that I'm including, they are scientists. These are people we're pointing to that are giving you the other side, the other story, the other side of the spectrum. We are not saying that all doctors are evil, all doctors mean to do everyone harm. We are not saying that. Some of us have had wonderful, glorious experiences. Maybe we'll do a broadcast on that one evening with the medical profession and had great outcomes, and they've saved lives. We know that. We recognize that. We acknowledge that. And we are thankful to the Lord Jesus Christ for these people, because there literally are wonderful people in the medical profession who are looking out for people's best interests and do want to try to save lives and do want to try to help and don't want to do any harm. And we are very thankful to the Lord for that, and to those people who have the correct attitude that they want to be ministers of righteousness in their profession. Okay, we are not saying that all doctors are wicked, but I did want to point out something that is in our Bibles that we forget. Maybe some of us forgot, and we're gonna close with this scripture. It is in Luke chapter 8, and I'm going to start at verse 43. That most of you have heard this story before, but I thought I'd bring it up this evening just as a reminder that nothing has changed. This is about 2,000 years old now, and then nothing has changed since then. And the Bible says in verse 43, "And the woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood stanched. And Jesus said, 'Who touched me?' When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, 'Master, the multitude throng thee and press thee. And sayest thou, Who touched me?' And Jesus said, 'Somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me.' And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said unto her, Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith had made thee whole. Go in peace. And the reason I read that passage is, if you see, first of all, we know that Jesus is the healer, and he still is the healer today, by the way. But at the beginning, she went to physicians and she spent all her living and she wasn't made any better. She grew worse. And sometimes we can have that effect, unfortunately, when we go to some of these doctors. People, if you do some research, you'll see there have been studies done that one of the reasons people end up bankrupt, if they end up bankrupt, is because of medical bills and and dealing with illnesses. So, beloved, we're just saying be prayerful, be cognizant, get information, because the Bible says my people perish for lack of knowledge. You don't want to get caught up in a web of lies, not having prayed, sought the Lord, discerned the truth, and searched out for yourself what the truth really is. And on that note, we're going to end the broadcast. Thank you so very much, everyone in the chat who has joined us this evening. Thank you again, Sister Angel Martin, for joining us. Y'all go check out her channel, subscribe. She has a lot of good things to say. I was checking out some of her videos. She's amazing, just amazing. Check out Sister Angel. Brother Matthias hosts Talking Doctrine. You can check out his channel. Thank you again, Brother Matthias, for producing this broadcast. We truly appreciate it. Be blessed, beloved of the Most High God, in the mighty name of King Jesus. Amen.
Amen.